When a desperate bartender steals evidence from a billionaire's corrupted empire to save his dying daughter, he triggers a war that will either destroy them all or forge an impossible family from the wreckage of their shattered lives. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button right now and drop your city name in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The rain came down like fists against the windows of McGrath's bar, each impact rattling the old glass in frames that should have been replaced a decade ago. Mason Reed moved behind the counter with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times to count, wiping down surfaces that would be sticky again in 20 minutes, refilling drinks for regulars whose names he'd stopped bothering to remember. The clock above the register read 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes until last call. 13 minutes closer to whatever nightmare tomorrow would bring. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to look at it to know what it was. Collection agencies didn't sleep, didn't care that he was working his second shift of the day, didn't give a damn that his daughter's medication cost more than he made in a month. The phone buzzed again. Then again. Mason pulled it out, silenced it, and shoved it back into his jeans without reading a single message. "Another round, Mace." Jerry Sullivan held up his empty glass, his third whiskey of the night pooling warm in his gut. "Make it a double this time." Mason poured without responding. The amber liquid caught the dim light as it splashed into the glass, and for just a second he understood why people drank themselves stupid. Oblivion looked pretty attractive when your 7-year-old daughter was going deaf, and every doctor you called said the same thing. Surgery might work, but it costs money you don't have. "You look like hell," Jerry said, which was rich coming from a man whose face had the texture of old leather. "Something eating you?" "Yes." "Same thing as always," Mason said. "Nothing I can fix by talking about it." Jerry grunted and went back to his drink. The man had been coming here since Mason started bartending 3 years ago, right after everything fell apart. Right after Mason lost his medical license, his career, his entire goddamn identity, because he'd trusted the wrong colleague who'd pinned a prescription fraud scheme on him when the investigation started. One signature Mason didn't remember giving, one testimonial from a doctor he'd considered a mentor, and suddenly Mason Reed MD was just Mason Reed, ex-doctor, current bartender, full-time failure. The door opened. Wind screamed through the gap, carrying rain and the smell of wet asphalt. A woman stepped inside. Mason noticed her immediately, which was unusual. He'd gotten good at not noticing customers, at seeing them as moving parts in the machine of his shift rather than actual people. But this woman demanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with the designer coat that probably cost more than Mason's car or the way every head in the bar turned when she walked in. She looked destroyed. Not messy. Everything about her was carefully composed, from the way her dark hair fell in precise waves around her face to the subtle makeup that probably took an hour to look that natural. But her eyes gave her away. They had the hollow, haunted quality of someone who'd just watched their entire world collapse and was still waiting to feel something about it. She walked to the bar and sat down 3 stools away from Jerry, far enough to claim space, close enough that Mason couldn't ignore her. For a long moment, she just stared at the scarred wooden surface, one manicured finger tracing patterns in the water rings left by previous glasses. "What can I get you, Mace?" Mason asked. Her eyes lifted. Blue, he noticed. The kind of blue that looked like it could cut through steel when she wanted it to, but right now just looked tired. What do people drink when everything they built is falling apart? Mason grabbed a bottle of bourbon from the top shelf, the good stuff that almost nobody ordered because of the price. He poured 2 fingers worth into a clean glass and set it in front of her. "This works, but it doesn't actually fix anything." Kim, of course. "Nothing fixes anything," she said quietly and lifted the glass to her lips. Mason went back to wiping down the bar, but he kept watching her from the corner of his eye. She drank the bourbon slowly, deliberately, like she was punishing herself with each sip. Rain continued hammering the windows. The jukebox in the corner played something country and mournful that perfectly matched the weather. "Do you believe people can betray you without remorse?" she asked suddenly. Mason looked up. "I know they can." "How do you live with it? When someone you trusted completely turns out to be destroying you behind your back?" He set down the rag. Most customers who asked personal questions were drunk and wouldn't remember the conversation in the morning. But something in her voice made him answer honestly. "You don't live with it. You survive it. There's a difference." She studied him for a long moment, and Mason had the uncomfortable feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. Not as the bartender, not as the failure, but as an actual human being with his own collection of scars. "I'm Scarlett," she said finally. "Mason." "Are you always this honest with strangers, Mason?" "Only when they look like they need it." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but it died before it fully formed. She finished the bourbon and pushed the glass forward. Another. Mason poured. Outside, thunder cracked loud enough to shake the building. Several customers jumped. Scarlett didn't even flinch. "I run a medical technology company," she said, staring into the fresh bourbon. "Spent the last 8 years building it from nothing. Revolutionary AI diagnostic systems, treatment protocols that save lives, partnerships with hospitals across the country. My life's work." Mason said nothing, just listened. Sometimes that was what people needed most. My CFO, my trusted partner, someone I've worked with since the beginning, I found out tonight he's been systematically positioning himself to steal everything. He's negotiating with investors behind my back, restructuring assets, building a case to vote me out of my own company. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles went white around the glass. Remained, "I didn't see it coming. I should have, but I didn't. So what?" "That's the point," Mason said. "You don't see betrayal coming from people you trust. If you did, you wouldn't trust them." Spoken like someone who's been there. Different circumstances. Same lesson. She lifted the glass again, then paused halfway to her lips. "You said you survive it instead of living with it. How long have you been surviving?" Ishrar spars isikiohu. Mason's phone buzzed again in his pocket. He pulled it out long enough to check the screen. Another text from the billing department at Children's Hospital Boston. The words "final notice" jumped out before he could stop himself from reading. He silenced the phone again and met Scarlett's eyes. 3 years, 2 months, 16 days. Give or take. Sounds precise. That's how long it's been since I lost my medical license. Since I went from being a doctor to being this. He gestured at the bar around them. Someone else's mistake pinned on me. By the time I proved I was set up, the damage was done. Reputation destroyed, license suspended, career over. Why haven't you fought to get it back? He can't afford lawyers when you're buried in debt and your daughter needs medication that costs. Mason stopped himself. He didn't talk about Chloe with customers, didn't talk about her with anyone if he could help it, because once he started talking about her situation, he'd have to acknowledge how terrified he was of losing her. And if he acknowledged that, he might actually break. Too late. Scarlett's attention sharpened. Your daughter is sick. My daughter is going deaf. Rare genetic condition affecting her cochlear nerves. Progressive, degenerative, probably irreversible without surgery that costs more than I'll make in 5 years of bartending. The words came out flat, mechanical. Mason had said them so many times to so many people who couldn't help that they'd lost all meaning. We're on a waiting list for a clinic trial that might help, but there's 200 families ahead of us, and they only take 20 participants per year. Meanwhile, she can barely hear me when I say goodnight. Won't I? Scarlett's expression shifted. Something cracked in her carefully maintained composure, just for a second, before she locked it down again. How old is she? Boom? 7. Her name is Chloe. Where's her mother? Gone. Left when Chloe was diagnosed. Said she couldn't handle raising a disabled child. Mason grabbed a clean glass and filled it with water, needing something to do with his hands. Can't really blame her. This isn't what anyone signs up for. I can blame her, Scarlett said quietly. Walking away from a child who needs you is the cruelest thing a person can do. The jukebox changed songs. Something older now. Blues guitar that matched the rain. Jerry Sullivan got up from his stool, dropped cash on the bar, and headed for the door with the careful steps of a man who'd had exactly one drink too many. The door closed behind him, and suddenly the bar felt much emptier. Why are you here? Mason asked. Shouldn't you be with lawyers, board members, people who can actually help with a corporate takeover? Because all those people work for me, and I don't know who else might be involved in the betrayal. My CFO didn't do this alone. Someone fed him information, helped him move pieces into place. Could be my head of legal. Could be my assistant. Could be any of the 200 employees I see every day. She finished the second bourbon. I came here because I needed to be somewhere nobody knows my name, nobody wants anything from me, nobody sees me as an opportunity or a threat. I just needed to exist as a person for 5 minutes. Must be exhausting, Mason said, being whoever everyone else needs you to be. Says the doctor working as a bartender. I'm not a doctor anymore. Well, losing a license doesn't change what you are, just what you're allowed to do. Mason had no response to that. The observation cut too close to something he'd been trying not to think about for 3 years. He'd stopped seeing himself as a doctor the day they suspended his license, stopped thinking of medicine as anything except another thing that had been taken from him. But late at night, when Chloe couldn't sleep because her ears hurt or she was scared of losing more sound, Mason still found himself slipping into that old identity, diagnosing, calculating medication dosages, explaining medical concepts in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Can I ask you something? Scarlett said. Sure. If you had the chance to take back what was stolen from you, your license, your career, your reputation, but it meant trusting someone powerful enough to help you, would you do it? Even knowing that powerful people are usually the most dangerous? Mason thought about Chloe's last hearing test, the way the audiologist's face had gone carefully neutral when she showed him the graph of deterioration. Thought about the collection notices stacked on his kitchen counter, the phone calls he'd stopped answering, the humiliating knowledge that he couldn't provide for his daughter the way a father should. I'd do anything to help my daughter, he said finally, including trusting people who could destroy me. I've got nothing left to lose that hasn't already been taken. Scarlett nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she'd been considering. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. Not the standard corporate rectangle, but heavy cardstock with minimal design. A name, Scarlett Vale, and a phone number. Nothing else. Keep that, she said, standing. You might need it. For what? I don't know yet. She pulled her coat tighter and headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. Rain and wind howled beyond the threshold. Thank you for the bourbon. And the honesty. You never paid for either one. Put it on my tab. Something tells me I'll be back. Then she was gone, disappearing into the storm like she'd never been there at all. Mason stood behind the bar, holding the business card, wondering what the hell had just happened. The clock showed 12:07 a.m. Past closing time. He locked the door, counted the register, and tried not to think about the mysterious billionaire who'd materialized out of the rain to share her crisis with a stranger. His phone buzzed again. This time Mason looked at it. Not a collection notice. Worse. A text from Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who watched Chloe when Mason worked nights. Chloe's upset. Asking for you. She says her ears hurt worse tonight. Mason's chest constricted. He typed back quickly. On my way. 20 minutes. He grabbed his jacket, killed the lights, and locked up McGrath's in record time. The rain soaked through his clothes before he reached his car, a 15-year-old Honda that sputtered for 10 seconds before the engine caught. Mason drove through empty streets, windshield wipers beating frantically against the downpour, his mind split between worry for Chloe and the strange encounter with Scarlett Vale. Mrs. Chen met him at her door, her kind face creased with concern. She's been crying for an hour. Nothing I did helped. It's not your fault, Mason said. It's the pressure changes from the storm. Makes everything worse. Chloe sat on Mrs. Chen's couch, wrapped in a blanket that dwarfed her small frame. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy from crying. When she saw Mason, she uncurled herself and ran to him with the desperate speed of a child who'd been waiting too long for rescue. Daddy! She crashed into his legs and held on tight. My ears hurt so much. Everything sounds fuzzy and far away. Mason knelt down and pulled her close, feeling her small body shake against his chest. I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. Am I going to go completely deaf? Her voice was muffled against his shoulder, but he heard the terror in it clearly enough. No, Mason lied, because what else could he say? The doctors are working on it. We're going to fix this. When? Soon. You always say soon. Because it's true. Chloe pulled back and looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for 7. You're lying. I can see it in your face when you think I'm not looking. You're scared I'm going to lose my hearing, and there's nothing you can do about it. Mason's heart cracked. He'd forgotten how perceptive children could be, how they saw through adult bullshit with laser precision. I'm working on a solution, I promise you that. What kind of solution? I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up, Miss. Chloe studied him for a long moment, then nodded and rested her head against his chest again. Okay, I believe you. Those 3 words destroyed him more effectively than any collection notice or eviction threat. She still believed in him, still trusted that her father could fix anything, despite 3 years of mounting evidence to the contrary. Mason held her tighter and tried not to think about what would happen when she finally realized he was just as powerless as she was. Let's go home, he said quietly. They drove through the rain in near silence. Chloe fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle that Mason would fix once they got home. He pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex, a rundown collection of 2-story buildings that had been cheap when he moved in and was still too expensive now, and carried Chloe upstairs. Their apartment was small but clean. Mason worked hard to keep it that way, partially because it was the one area of his life he could still control, and partially because he wanted Chloe to have something stable when everything else was falling apart. He tucked her into bed, brushed hair back from her forehead, and kissed her gently. "Love you, Daddy," she mumbled, half asleep. "Love you too, Chloe Bear. She smiled at the old nickname and drifted off completely. Mason stood in the doorway watching her sleep, listening to her quiet breathing, trying not to imagine a future where she couldn't hear him say goodnight. His phone buzzed. Another text, but not from the hospital this time. An unknown number. "This is Scarlet Vale. I've been thinking about our conversation tonight. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. Address below. Come alone." Mason stared at the message, then at the business card still in his pocket. He should ignore it, should delete the text and pretend the whole strange encounter had never happened. Mysterious billionaires didn't swoop into failing bartenders' lives with job offers and solutions. That wasn't how the real world worked. But maybe the real world didn't matter anymore when you were drowning and someone threw you a rope. Mason typed back, "I'll be there." He spent the next hour staring at collection notices spread across his kitchen table. Medical bills from 3 different specialists, none of whom could help Chloe without money he didn't have. A letter from his landlord threatening eviction if he missed 1 more month's rent. A suspended medical license renewal form that he couldn't afford to file even if he had grounds to reinstate his status. The apartment was too quiet. Mason found himself thinking about what Scarlett had said, that losing a license didn't change what you were. He'd stopped believing that a long time ago. Stopped seeing himself as anything except a collection of failures held together by stubbornness and debt. But maybe she was right. Maybe somewhere underneath the bartender uniform and the exhaustion, Dr. Mason Reed still existed. Maybe all he needed was the right opportunity to prove it. Or maybe this was desperation talking, and tomorrow he'd meet Scarlet Vale, only to discover she'd been drunk and wouldn't even remember offering to help. Either way, he'd show up. Because when you were this far underwater, you grabbed onto anything that looked like it might float. The next day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Mason dropped Chloe off at school. She was quieter than usual, still tired from the night before, then went home and tried to sleep. That lasted about 40 minutes before anxiety jolted him awake. He gave up, showered, and got dressed in the only decent clothes he owned. Dark jeans without holes, a button-down shirt that was only slightly wrinkled, and a jacket that had seen better days but still looked presentable from a distance. The address Scarlett sent led to a high-rise building in downtown Boston that Mason had walked past 100 times but never actually entered. The kind of place where the lobby had marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Security stopped him at the desk. "I'm here to see Scarlet Vale," Mason said, feeling immediately out of place. The guard checked his computer, made a phone call, then nodded. "Top floor. Someone will meet you at the elevator." Mason rode up in silence, watching floor numbers tick by on the digital display. The elevator doors opened onto a private office space that was all glass and steel and carefully curated minimalism. A woman in an immaculate suit waited for him. "Mr. Reed, please follow me." She led him through corridors lined with photographs of medical technology, surgical robots, diagnostic imaging machines, labs full of equipment Mason vaguely recognized from his training days. Employees moved with purposeful efficiency, barely glancing at him as he passed. Everyone looked important and busy and like they belonged there in ways Mason definitely didn't. The woman stopped at a set of double doors and knocked once. "Miss Vale, Mr. Reed is here." "Send him in." Mason stepped through the doors and found himself in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Boston. In daylight, without rain and wind obscuring everything, the city looked almost beautiful. Almost. Scarlett stood near the windows with her back to the door. She wore a different outfit today, tailored pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Mason's car, but the exhaustion in her posture was the same. She turned when he entered. "You came," she said. "You sent an address. Seemed rude not to show up." A thin smile. "Close the door." Mason did. Suddenly the office felt smaller, more intimate, like they were back in the bar instead of 70 floors above the city. Scarlett gestured to a leather chair near her desk. "Sit." "I'm good standing." "Goshi. Suit yourself." She moved to the desk and pulled out a folder. "I did some research on you last night. Dr. Mason Reed graduated top of your class from Johns Hopkins, completed residency at Massachusetts General, specialization in emergency medicine. Promising career until you were accused of participating in a prescription fraud scheme 3 years ago." Mason's jaw tightened. "I was set up." "I know. I found the colleague who actually ran the scheme. He's currently serving time in federal prison for unrelated fraud charges. His deposition mentions your name specifically as a scapegoat he used when investigators got too close." She pushed the folder toward him. "It's all in there. Court records, testimonies, everything you'd need to file for reinstatement of your medical license." Mason stared at the folder without touching it. "Why?" "Because I need someone I can trust, and trust is a commodity in short supply right now." Scarlett circled around the desk and leaned against it, arms crossed. "My CFO, Damian Graves, has been systematically positioning himself to take over my company. He's got board members in his pocket, investors lined up, probably half my senior staff feeding him information. I need someone outside that circle. Someone smart enough to understand medical technology and business implications, desperate enough to take a risk, and angry enough to want revenge against people who destroyed him. You want me to spy on your own company? I want you to help me figure out who I can trust before they steal everything I've built. And in exchange, I'll give you the evidence to clear your name, connections to medical attorneys who can fast-track your reinstatement, and enough money to get your daughter the surgery she needs." The words hit Mason like a physical blow. He finally picked up the folder and flipped through it with shaking hands. Everything Scarlett promised was there. Court transcripts, witness statements, documentation that proved conclusively Mason had been set up. "How did you find all this in one night?" "I'm very good at research when I'm motivated, and I have resources most people don't." Scarlett's expression softened slightly. "I looked into your daughter's condition too. Bilateral cochlear nerve degeneration. Surgery is experimental but shows an 80% success rate in similar cases. The clinic waiting list you're on is run by Dr. Sarah Chen at Boston Children's. She's a former colleague of mine. One phone call, and I can move your daughter to the front of the line." Mason's vision blurred. He gripped the folder so hard the pages crumpled. "Why are you doing this?" "Because last night you were the first person in months who treated me like a human being instead of a resource to exploit. Because I'm tired of being surrounded by people who only see dollar signs when they look at me. Because..." She stopped herself, looked away briefly. "Because your daughter deserves better than losing her hearing while her father works himself to death trying to save her." "I can't pay you back." "I don't want money. I want loyalty. I want someone in my corner who isn't there because of what they can take from me." Mason looked down at the folder again, at the evidence that could restore his career, at the information about Chloe's surgery, at the lifeline he'd stopped believing existed. What exactly would I be doing? "Officially, you'd be my personal driver and assistant. Unofficially, you'd help me investigate who's betraying me and gather evidence to stop them before they succeed. It's dangerous. Damian is ruthless and well-connected. If he figures out what we're doing, he'll destroy you the same way he's trying to destroy me. I told you last night I have nothing left to lose. You have a daughter. That's everything to lose. Peace. Mason thought about Chloe sitting on Mrs. Chen's couch, crying because her ears hurt and asking when things would get better. Thought about the stack of bills on his kitchen table and the eviction notice he'd received 3 days ago. Thought about 3 years of surviving instead of living. If I do this, he said slowly, and we succeed in stopping your CFO, you'll guarantee Chloe's surgery, no matter what happens? I'll guarantee it right now. Scarlett pulled her phone from her pocket, dialed, and put it on speaker. After 3 rings, a woman answered. Scarlett, it's late. Is everything all right? Hi, Sarah. I need a favor. Scarlett's voice took on a professional warmth that Mason recognized from his own doctor days, the tone people used when calling in debts from colleagues. I'm sending you a file on a patient, 7-year-old girl with bilateral cochlear nerve degeneration. She's on your clinic trial waiting list. I need her moved to your next available surgery slot. Scarlett, you know I can't just... Yes, you can. You owe me for the equipment grant that saved your lab 3 years ago. I'm calling it in. This child needs help now, not in 2 years when the waiting list clears. Silence on the other end. Then a sigh. Send me the file. I'll review it tonight and call you tomorrow. Thank you, Sarah. You're not going to tell me why this is so important to you. Scarlett glanced at Mason. Let's just say I'm learning to pay attention when the universe puts people in my path. Talk soon. She ended the call and pocketed the phone. Dr. Chen is the best pediatric neurologist in the country. If anyone can save your daughter's hearing, it's her. Mason couldn't breathe. After 3 years of closed doors and impossible obstacles and endless rejection, someone was actually helping, actually giving him what he needed without demanding things he couldn't provide. When do I start? He asked. Now. I need you to drive me to a meeting with my board of directors in an hour. While I'm presenting, you'll wait outside and observe everyone who goes in and out of the conference room. I want to know who's nervous, who's confident, who's checking their phones too often. You were an ER doctor. You're trained to read people under pressure. Use that. I haven't been a doctor in 3 years. Then consider this practice for when your license gets reinstated. Scarlett handed him a set of car keys. The company car is in the garage, black sedan, parking spot A12. I'll meet you downstairs in 45 minutes. Mason took the keys. They felt heavy in his hand, weighted with implication and risk, and the faint possibility of hope. If this goes wrong, if your CFO finds out I'm helping you, then we both go down fighting, Scarlett finished. But we do it together. Deal? See. She extended her hand. Mason looked at it for a long moment, thinking about Chloe's tear-stained face and the bills on his kitchen table and 3 years of barely keeping his head above water. Then he reached out and shook. Deal. The company car was exactly what Mason expected from a billionaire's fleet. Leather seats that probably cost more than his monthly rent, dashboard technology he didn't fully understand, and that new car smell that reminded him of everything he'd lost when his life fell apart. He adjusted the driver's seat and mirrors, then sat waiting in the underground garage, watching executives walk past with their expensive briefcases and their confident strides that said they belonged in this world. Mason didn't belong here. That much was obvious. His phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Chen asking if he needed her to pick up Chloe from school. Mason typed back yes and added an apology for the short notice. Mrs. Chen responded with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else, which meant she was probably getting tired of covering for him at the last minute. He'd have to figure something out long-term, but right now long-term planning felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. The elevator doors opened and Scarlett emerged, flanked by 2 assistants who were clearly trying to brief her on something urgent. She waved them off with barely concealed irritation and headed toward the car. Mason got out and opened the rear door, playing the part of professional driver, even though he had no idea what that actually entailed. Thank you, Scarlett said, sliding into the back seat. She waited until Mason was behind the wheel and the partition between them was closed before pressing the intercom button. You can open that partition. I need you to listen. Mason lowered it. In the rearview mirror, he watched Scarlett pull out a tablet and start scrolling through what looked like financial documents. The board meeting is at Vale Industries headquarters across town. 12 board members will be there, plus my CFO, Damian Graves, and my head of legal, Patricia Vance. We're presenting quarterly earnings and discussing the AI medical diagnostic platform we've been developing for 3 years. It's worth billions once it goes to market, which is why Damian wants control of it so badly. What makes you think he's making his move now? Because the platform is 3 months away from FDA approval. Once we have that, the company's valuation triples and it becomes much harder to execute a hostile takeover. He needs to act before we reach that milestone. Scarlett looked up from the tablet, meeting Mason's eyes in the mirror. I need you to pay attention to who talks to Damian before and after the meeting, who pulls him aside for private conversations, who seems nervous or overly confident. You'll see patterns that I can't because I'm too close to it. What if someone recognizes me as more than just your driver? They won't. You're furniture to these people, staff. They won't even register that you're there. Mason thought about all the times he'd been on the other side of that dynamic, the respected doctor who probably didn't notice the orderlies and cleaning staff and cafeteria workers who made the hospital run. The realization made him uncomfortable in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. They drove in silence for a while, weaving through Boston traffic that seemed heavier than usual for mid-afternoon. Mason kept checking the rearview mirror, watching Scarlett work. She had the focused intensity of someone who'd built an empire through sheer force of will, but he could also see the cracks in her armor, the way her jaw tightened when she read certain emails, the barely perceptible tremor in her hand when she thought no one was watching. "Can I ask you something?" Mason said. "Go ahead." "Why me? You said you needed someone you could trust, but you don't actually know me. I could be working for your CFO right now, for all you know." Scarlett set down the tablet. "Do you remember what you said last night about surviving instead of living?" "Yeah. I've been doing the same thing for years. Building this company, making it successful, proving I belonged in a world that didn't want me there. But somewhere along the way I forgot that success without trust is just isolation with better furniture." She paused. "When you talked about your daughter last night, I saw something I haven't seen in anyone around me for a long time. You genuinely care about someone more than yourself. That's rare in my world." "Well, come. Caring about my daughter isn't exactly special. Most parents do that." "You'd be surprised how many don't. My parents certainly didn't." Mason heard the weight behind those words and decided not to push. Everyone had their own collection of scars, and Scarlett's were clearly deep enough that she'd learned to hide them behind boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. They arrived at Vale Industries with 10 minutes to spare. The building was newer than the one they'd left, all glass and steel with the company logo prominent on the facade. Mason pulled into the executive parking area and opened Scarlett's door. She stepped out and immediately transformed. Shoulders back, expression composed, every trace of vulnerability locked away behind the CEO persona she wore like armor. "Stay close but not intrusive," she said quietly. "Observe everything." "Yes, sir, Barton." "Dish Gishati." Mason followed her through the lobby and into an elevator that required a special key card to access the executive floors. They rode up in silence, along with 2 men in expensive suits who didn't acknowledge either of them. When the doors opened, Scarlett headed down a corridor toward a large conference room while Mason positioned himself near the entrance with a clear view of everyone coming and going. The board members arrived in clusters, talking among themselves in low voices that carried the particular tension of people preparing for conflict. Mason recognized the types from his hospital days, the ambitious ones who saw every meeting as a chance to advance their own agenda, the cautious ones who wanted to avoid making enemies, the tired ones who just wanted to collect their fees and go home. Then Damian Graves arrived, and Mason understood immediately why Scarlett was afraid of this man. He looked like someone who'd been designed by a focus group to inspire confidence. Tall, handsome in that generic way that made him instantly forgettable, dressed in a suit that probably cost $5,000 but didn't look ostentatious. His smile was warm and genuine and completely empty. Mason had met men like this before, usually in hospital administration, the ones who could look you in the eye and promise support right before they threw you under the bus. Damian noticed Mason standing by the door and gave him the kind of dismissive glance people reserved for furniture. Then his attention shifted to someone behind Mason and his entire demeanor changed. Warmer, more animated, like he'd just spotted someone important. "Patricia, there you are." Damian approached a woman in her 50s with sharp features and sharper eyes. "Do you have a moment before we go in?" "Ich sehe." Patricia Vance, head of legal. Mason watched as she and Damian moved to a corner for a hushed conversation. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told him everything he needed to know. Patricia was nervous, kept glancing toward the conference room like she was worried about being seen. Damian was reassuring, one hand briefly touching her shoulder in a gesture that looked supportive but felt calculated. After 2 minutes, they separated and entered the conference room. Mason waited another moment, then positioned himself where he could see through the glass walls without being obvious about it. The meeting began with standard pleasantries and agenda items. Scarlett stood at the head of the table, presenting financial reports with calm authority that belied the war being waged beneath the surface. Mason watched Damian. The CFO nodded along with Scarlett's presentation, occasionally asking questions that sounded reasonable but were clearly designed to undermine her points. Several board members seemed to agree with him. Others looked uncomfortable, like they knew what was happening but didn't want to get involved. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When it finally ended, Mason observed the aftermath carefully. Most board members filed out quickly, clearly relieved to escape. But 3 of them, 2 men and 1 woman, lingered to talk with Damian. Mason committed their faces to memory, noting the way they seemed to form a tight cluster around the CFO, speaking in low voices with frequent glances toward Scarlett, who was gathering her materials at the other end of the room. Patricia Vance emerged last, looking troubled. She saw Mason standing there and froze for just a second before recovering. "You're Ms. Vale's new driver?" "Yes, ma'am." Interesting timing. Her tone suggested it was anything but a neutral observation. Then she walked away quickly, heels clicking against the marble floor. Scarlett joined Mason a few minutes later. Her composure was still intact, but he could see the exhaustion creeping in around the edges. "Let's go." They didn't speak until they were back in the car with the partition closed and heading toward downtown. Then Scarlett let out a long breath and leaned her head back against the seat. "Well?" she asked. Mason kept his eyes on the road but organized his observations carefully. 3 board members stayed behind to talk with Damian, 2 older men in gray suits and a woman with red glasses. They looked like they were coordinating something. "Your head of legal is nervous about whatever she's involved in. She practically ran away when I asked if she needed anything." "I didn't hear you ask her anything." "I didn't, but she acted like I had, which means she's expecting questions." Scarlett was quiet for a moment. "The board members you mentioned are Robert Chen, Marcus Webb, and Diana Frost. They've been with the company since the beginning. I thought they were loyal." "Loyalty is expensive. Maybe Damian made them a better offer." "Maybe." Scarlett pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. "I need you to do something for me tonight. Are you free?" Mason thought about Chloe, about Mrs. Chen watching her for the 3rd time this week, about the homework he was supposed to help with, and the bedtime stories he'd been missing. Define free. "I need access to Damian's office computer. There's a charity gala tonight at the Fairmont Hotel. Mandatory attendance for all senior staff. Damian will be there along with everyone else, which means the office will be empty." "You want me to break in. I want you to access information that belongs to my company but is being hidden from me by someone attempting corporate espionage. Legally speaking, it's not breaking in. Legally speaking, you have lawyers to handle this kind of thing." "My lawyers might be compromised. You're not." Scarlett leaned forward, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "I know I'm asking a lot. If you're not comfortable with it, I'll do it," Mason said. The words came out before he fully processed the decision, driven by something deeper than logic. Maybe it was the memory of Chloe crying about her ears hurting. Maybe it was 3 years of feeling powerless, finally meeting an opportunity to act. Maybe it was just desperation wearing the mask of courage. "You'll need this." Scarlett handed him a security badge. "It'll get you into the building and past the first 2 checkpoints. Damian's office is on the 72nd floor, southeast corner. I'll text you the computer password." "How do you know his password?" "I'm the CEO. I know all the passwords." A thin smile. "The irony of having security access to spy on the person spying on you isn't lost on me." They drove the rest of the way in silence. Mason dropped Scarlett at her apartment building, a converted historic brownstone in Beacon Hill that probably cost more per month than Mason had earned in his entire medical career, and watched her disappear inside. Then he sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the security badge in his hand. What the hell was he doing? 24 hours ago, he'd been a bartender with no prospects and mounting debt. Now he was planning to break into a corporate office to steal evidence of fraud from a CFO who probably had more lawyers than Mason had brain cells. If he got caught, he'd go to prison. If he succeeded, he'd be complicit in whatever war Scarlett was waging against her own company. His phone buzzed. A text from Chloe, sent from Mrs. Chen's phone. "Daddy, where are you? Mrs. Chen says you're working, but you're always working now. When are you coming home?" Mason's chest tightened. He typed back, "Soon, sweetheart. I promise. Have you done your homework?" "Yes, it was easy." Mrs. Chen helped with the math parts I couldn't hear the teacher explain. That last sentence destroyed him. Chloe was falling behind in school because she couldn't hear properly, and Mason had been so focused on survival that he'd barely noticed. He gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. "I'll be home for bedtime. I love you." "Love you too, Daddy." Mason checked the time. 5 hours until the gala started, which gave him just enough time to figure out what the hell he was going to say to Chloe about why he'd been gone so much lately. He drove to his apartment building, parked in his assigned spot that was currently occupied by someone else's car, and walked upstairs feeling every bit of his 32 years. Mrs. Chen answered her door before he could knock. "She's doing homework at my kitchen table. Hasn't complained once, but I can tell she's struggling to concentrate." "I know. I'm sorry for dumping this on you so much." "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to your daughter." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "She needs her father, Mason. Whatever you're doing to make money, I hope it's worth missing her childhood." The words hit harder because they were true. Mason nodded and went inside. Chloe sat at the kitchen table with her math workbook open, pencil in hand, looking small and tired and impossibly young. When she saw him, her face lit up. "Daddy!" She jumped up and ran to hug him. "You're home early." It was barely 6 o'clock. Early. That's what passed for normal now. "Hey, Chloe Bear, how was school?" "Okay. I couldn't hear during library time, so I just pretended to read. And at lunch, Emma was telling a joke, but I missed the ending, so I laughed anyway, even though I don't know why it was funny. But..." She said it matter-of-factly, like this was just how life worked now. Mason knelt down so they were eye level. "That's going to change soon. I'm working on getting you help." "You always say that." "This time it's different, I promise." Chloe studied his face with that unnerving perceptiveness she'd inherited from her mother. "Are you in trouble?" "No. Why would you think that?" "Because you have your scared face on. The one you think I don't notice?" Mason forced a smile. "I'm not scared. I'm just tired. New job. Lots to learn." "What kind of job?" "I'm working for someone important, helping her with business things." "Do you like it?" That was a harder question to answer. Did he like working for Scarlett? He barely knew her, but for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was actually doing something that mattered, something that might lead somewhere beyond an endless treadmill of debt and survival. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I do." Chloe hugged him again, and Mason held on maybe a little too tightly. After a moment, she pulled back and looked up at him seriously. "Mrs. Chen says I'm very mature for my age. Is that because you're sad all the time and I have to be grown up to help you?" The question nearly broke him. "Chloe, it's okay, Daddy. I don't mind. I just want you to know I notice things." Mason had no response to that. He thanked Mrs. Chen, gathered Chloe's backpack and homework, and took his daughter home. They ate dinner together, mac and cheese from a box because that's what they could afford, and Mason listened as Chloe talked about her day, filling in the gaps where her hearing had failed her with imagination and optimism that felt both heartbreaking and inspiring. At 8 o'clock, he tucked her into bed. She was already half asleep, worn out from trying to navigate a world that was slowly going silent. "Daddy?" she mumbled. "Yeah?" "When I get better, can we go to the beach? I want to hear the ocean before I forget what it sounds like." "We'll go to the beach, I promise." "Okay." She smiled and drifted off. Mason stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her sleep, trying not to think about all the promises he'd made that he hadn't been able to keep. Then he changed clothes, grabbed the security badge Scarlett had given him, and headed back out into the night. The Vale Industries building was mostly dark when Mason arrived at 10:30. A few lights still burned on various floors where people worked late, but the executive levels were empty. Security in the lobby was minimal. One guard who barely looked up from his phone when Mason swiped the badge and headed for the elevators. The ride up to the 72nd floor felt longer than it should have. Mason's heart hammered against his ribs and his palms were sweating. He'd never done anything remotely illegal in his life. Even when he'd been set up for prescription fraud, his actual crime had been trusting the wrong person, not intentionally breaking rules. This was different. This was deliberate. The elevator doors opened onto a darkened corridor. Emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate by. Mason found Damian's office exactly where Scarlett said it would be, corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He used the security badge to unlock the door and slipped inside. The office was pristine, organized with the kind of obsessive precision that suggested Damian was either a control freak or very good at hiding things. Mason booted up the computer and entered the password Scarlett had texted him. The screen flickered to life. He started with email, scanning through hundreds of messages looking for anything suspicious. Most of it was standard corporate communication, budget reports, meeting requests, client correspondence. But buried in a folder labeled Personal Projects, Mason found something interesting. Email threads with the 3 board members who'd lingered after the meeting. Robert Chen, Marcus Webb, Diana Frost. The messages were carefully worded to avoid direct admission of wrongdoing, but the implications were clear. Damian was offering them significant financial incentives to support a vote of no confidence against Scarlett at next month's board meeting. Once Scarlett was removed as CEO, Damian would take over and immediately begin negotiations to sell the AI medical platform to a consortium of investors for a price that would make everyone involved very wealthy. Mason kept reading, his stomach sinking with each new message. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering. It was systematic betrayal orchestrated with cold precision. Damian had been planning this for at least 18 months, slowly positioning pieces on the board while Scarlett remained oblivious. Then Mason found the files that changed everything. Hidden in a subfolder within the subfolder were internal memos detailing safety concerns with the AI diagnostic platform. The system had a flaw, a small one, but significant enough that it could lead to misdiagnoses in approximately 2% of cases. Damian had known about this for 6 months and deliberately suppressed the information to keep the FDA approval process on track. If the platform went to market with that flaw, people would die. Not many, but enough. And Damian didn't care. The office door opened behind him. Mason spun around, adrenaline spiking. Damian Graves stood in the doorway, his expression calm but his eyes cold and calculating. "I was wondering when Scarlett would make her move," Damian said conversationally, as if he'd just run into Mason at a coffee shop instead of catching him breaking into a secured office. "I have to admit, hiring a failed doctor with nothing to lose is cleverer than I expected from her." Mason's mind raced through options. Running was pointless. Damian was blocking the only exit. Fighting was equally stupid. Mason had never thrown a punch in his life and wasn't about to start now. That left talking, which had never been his strength but was currently his only card to play. "How did you know I was here?" I shouldn't. Silent alarm on my computer. Triggers whenever someone accesses those particular files. Damian stepped further into the office and closed the door behind him. "It's not personal, Mr. Reed. You seem like a decent man trying to help his sick daughter, but you've inserted yourself into a situation you don't understand. I understand enough. You're stealing from Scarlett, and you're willing to let people die to do it." That's a dramatic interpretation. I prefer to think of it as correcting a structural inefficiency in the company's leadership. Damian moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, moved, looking out at the city like they were discussing the weather. Scarlett is brilliant, but she's also naive. She actually believes this company exists to help people. In reality, it exists to generate profit for shareholders. That's capitalism. That's sociopathy. Sometimes they're the same thing. Damian turned back to face him. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to delete whatever files you've accessed, leave this office, and convince Scarlett to stop investigating me. In exchange, I won't have you arrested for corporate espionage, and I'll make sure your daughter gets her surgery." Mason stared at him. You're bribing me. I'm offering you a practical solution to an unnecessary problem. Your daughter needs help. I can provide it. Scarlett is fighting a battle she's already lost. My board votes are secured, my investors are committed, and by next month I'll control this company regardless of what you or she do. The only question is whether you want to go down with her or walk away with your daughter's health restored. And the platform's safety flaw? Will be quietly patched after the sale completes. A few bad diagnoses are unfortunate but acceptable compared to the alternative of delaying a technology that will help millions. You're a doctor. You understand triage. Mason did understand triage. He'd made those calculations 1,000 times in emergency rooms, deciding who got treatment first based on who had the best chance of survival. But this was different. This wasn't saving the most lives possible with limited resources. This was knowingly releasing dangerous technology for profit. No, Mason said. Damian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Excuse me? I'm not deleting these files, I'm not walking away, and I'm not going to let you hurt people just because it's profitable. Then you're going to prison. I'll have security here in 3 minutes and the police right behind them. You'll be arrested for breaking and entering, corporate espionage, attempted theft of proprietary information. With your history of prescription fraud, even a bogus conviction will look credible. You'll spend years in prison while your daughter goes deaf without you. The threat landed exactly where Damian intended it to, directly in Mason's greatest fear. He thought about Chloe asking when he'd be home, about her mature for her age understanding that her father was always scared now, about the beach trip they'd take when she got better. If he got better. Mason looked at the computer screen showing Damian's emails, then back at the man who'd orchestrated this entire conspiracy without apparent remorse. He thought about what Scarlett had said in the bar that first night, that she needed someone desperate enough to take risks and angry enough to want revenge. She'd found him. Call security, Mason said quietly. But I'm taking these files with me. He pulled the USB drive from his pocket, the one Scarlett had given him that morning with instructions he hadn't fully understood until now, and plugged it into the computer. The files began copying automatically. 15 seconds. 20. Damian moved toward him, but Mason stepped between him and the computer. Don't, Mason said. He wasn't intimidating, wasn't strong, wasn't trained for confrontation, but he was a father who'd already lost everything once and refused to do it again. That made him dangerous in ways Damian's corporate calculation couldn't account for. The file transfer completed. Mason pulled the drive and backed toward the door. Damian made no move to stop him now. He was already on his phone, undoubtedly calling security like he'd threatened. Mason ran. He hit the corridor at full speed, heading for the emergency stairs because the elevators would trap him. Behind him he heard shouting, footsteps, the distinctive crackle of security radios. He took the stairs 2 at a time, 62 floors down, his legs burning and his lungs screaming by the time he reached the ground level. The lobby security guard was waiting with 2 others. Mason didn't slow down. He crashed through the side door that led to the parking garage, set off an alarm that shrieked loud enough to wake everyone in downtown Boston, and made it to the company car just as security poured into the garage behind him. The engine started on the first try. Mason reversed without looking, narrowly missing a concrete pillar, and accelerated toward the exit. In his rearview mirror, he saw security guards running after him, but they couldn't keep pace with a car, and he was through the gate before they could close it. He drove 6 blocks before pulling into an alley and killing the engine. His hands shook violently. His heart felt like it might explode. And clutched in his sweating palm was a USB drive containing evidence that could either save Scarlett's company or put Mason in prison. His phone rang. Scarlett. Did you get it? She asked without preamble. I got it, but Damian was there. He knows everything. And security chased me out of the building, so they definitely have me on cameras. Silence on the other end. Then, where are you? Mason gave her the intersection. Scarlett, there's something else. The AI platform has a safety flaw. Damian's known for months, and he's been hiding it. How bad? Bad enough that people will die if it goes to market as is. Another pause. Longer this time. When Scarlett spoke again, her voice was steel. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone to pick you up. Give them the drive and then go home to your daughter. Tomorrow we figure out our next move. They're going to arrest me. Not if I have anything to say about it. Trust me, Mason. Shut. The line went dead. Mason sat in the dark car, listening to his own ragged breathing, wondering when exactly he'd lost control of his life. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up behind him. A woman in her 40s got out, knocked on his window, and identified herself as Scarlett's head of personal security. Mason handed over the USB drive and watched her disappear back into the SUV. Then he drove home, parked the company car in the lot of his apartment building where it would definitely get towed by morning, and climbed the stairs to his unit on shaking legs. Mrs. Chen was asleep on his couch, with the TV on low volume. Mason gently woke her and apologized for being so late. She studied his face with concern, but didn't ask questions, just gathered her things and headed home with a whispered reminder to get some rest. Mason checked on Chloe. Still sleeping, one small hand curled under her cheek. He stood in her doorway watching her breathe, thinking about everything he'd just risked for a woman he barely knew and a company he had no stake in. But that wasn't quite true. He had a stake. Chloe's surgery, his medical license, a chance at rebuilding the life that had been stolen from him. Scarlett had offered him hope, and hope made people do desperate things. He just hoped it was enough. Mason didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the apartment settle around him, waiting for police sirens that never came. At 4 a.m, he gave up pretending and made coffee, sitting at his kitchen table with collection notices he didn't have the energy to read and a phone that stayed stubbornly silent. Scarlett didn't call. Her security team didn't show up. By the time dawn broke gray and cold over Boston, Mason had convinced himself that he'd been set up, that Damian had already leveraged his connections to turn this into a criminal case, that any minute now there'd be a knock on his door and his daughter would watch her father get arrested. At 6:30, his phone finally buzzed, a text from Scarlett with an address and a time. 9 a.m. Come alone. Bring nothing. No explanation. No reassurance. Just instructions delivered with the assumption they'd be followed. Mason woke Chloe at 7, got her dressed and fed, and walked her to school holding her hand tighter than necessary. She chattered about a field trip coming up that he'd forgotten to sign the permission slip for, and a boy in her class who kept pulling her hair at recess. Normal 7-year-old problems in a life that was rapidly becoming anything but normal. "Daddy, you're squeezing too hard," Chloe said, trying to pull her hand free. Mason loosened his grip. "Sorry, sweetheart. Just distracted. Are you worried about your new job?" Something like that. Mrs. Chen says when grown-ups are worried, they should talk about it instead of keeping it inside where it gets bigger. Chloe looked up at him seriously. "Is your worry getting bigger?" "Maybe a little." "Then you should talk about it. I'm a good listener." She smiled, that gap-toothed grin that could break his heart and put it back together simultaneously. "Even if I can't hear everything anymore, I'm still good at listening with my eyes." Mason knelt down on the sidewalk outside her school, not caring about the other parents streaming past with their perfectly normal lives and their complete lack of federal crimes committed the night before. "You're the best listener I know, Chloe Bear, and I promise when this is all over, I'm going to tell you everything. But right now I need you to be patient with me while I figure some things out." "Okay." She hugged him quickly, then pulled back with sudden worry. "You're not going away, are you? Like Mommy did?" The question gutted him. "Never. I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that." "Okay, I believe you." She kissed his cheek and ran toward the school entrance where her friends were gathering. Mason watched until she disappeared inside, then headed back to his car, trying not to think about promises he might not be able to keep. The address Scarlett sent led to a law office in the financial district, 20 floors up in a building that screamed money and power. Mason gave his name to the receptionist and was immediately ushered into a conference room where Scarlett sat with 3 people he didn't recognize. 2 men in expensive suits and a woman with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested she didn't lose arguments often. "Mason, this is Richard Walsh, Thomas Brennan, and Janet Morrison," Scarlett said without preamble. "They're the attorneys handling the case against Damian." "What case?" "I stole corporate files last night. I'm the one who committed the crime." "Actually, you didn't." Janet Morrison opened a folder and pushed it across the table. "Under Massachusetts corporate law, the CEO of a company has the legal authority to access any files related to potential fraud or misconduct. Ms. Vale deputized you as her agent for the specific purpose of investigating suspected illegal activity by her CFO. Everything you did last night was within legal boundaries. Mason stared at the document in front of him. It was dated 2 days ago, signed by Scarlett and notarized. She'd planned this before she ever sent him into that office. "You set me up," he said quietly. "I protected you," Scarlett corrected. "Damian was always going to catch you. His security is too good for anything else. But I needed him to think you were acting alone so he'd get overconfident and make mistakes." Which he did. "You used me as bait. I gave you legal cover and made sure you'd walk away clean. There's a difference." Scarlett leaned forward, her expression intense. "The files you recovered prove everything. Damian's been embezzling company funds, bribing board members, and deliberately suppressing safety data on a medical device that could kill people. We have enough evidence to destroy him legally and professionally." Richard Walsh, the older of the two male attorneys, cleared his throat. "However, there are complications. Damian filed a police report this morning claiming you broke into his office and stole proprietary information. He's got security footage of you running from the building and testimony from 3 guards who witnessed it. But you just said I'm legally protected." "You are. But proving that in court will take time and money, and in the interim, Damian is using the criminal complaint as leverage. He's threatening to drag this out publicly, which will damage both you and Ms. Vale's company." "So what's the play?" Mason asked, looking at Scarlett. "We go to the board," she said, "present the evidence of fraud and safety violations, force them to remove Damian before he can execute his takeover. But we need something more, proof that his board allies knew about the safety flaw and chose to hide it anyway. That would eliminate their credibility and leave them no choice but to side with us." Thomas Brennan, younger and sharper dressed than his colleague, pulled out his own folder. "The problem is the evidence we have shows Damian suppressed information, but doesn't conclusively prove he shared it with Chen, Webb, or Frost. They can claim ignorance and walk away clean." "Then we get them to admit it on record," Mason said. Everyone turned to look at him. Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Damian offered me a deal last night. Money for Chloe's surgery in exchange for walking away and convincing you to stop investigating. If he's willing to bribe me, he's probably made similar offers to other people. We find someone he paid off and get them to testify." "Damian's too careful for that," Scarlett said. "He'd never put a bribe in writing or make an offer without plausible deniability." "What about Patricia Vance?" Mason thought back to the nervous woman at the board meeting. "You're head of legal. She met with Damian before the meeting, and she was clearly anxious about something. If he's making his move now, he'd need legal advice to structure the takeover. Patricia would know everything." Scarlett's expression darkened. "Patricia's been with me for 6 years. I trusted her. Which is exactly why Damian would target her. She has access to everything: contracts, financials, legal strategies. If she flipped, she'd be worth more than 3 board members combined." Janet Morrison was already making notes. "If we can prove Patricia knowingly assisted in suppressing safety data, that's a criminal conspiracy charge. Federal prison, disbarment, the works. That kind of pressure might convince her to cooperate. Or it might make her double down and protect herself," Richard Walsh countered. "We'd need leverage, something personal." Mason thought about Patricia's body language, the way she'd practically fled when she saw him standing outside the conference room. Fear. She was terrified of something, and it wasn't just losing her job. "Damian has something on her," Mason said. "Something beyond just offering money. She looks scared, not greedy." Scarlett stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the skyline like she could find answers written in the architecture. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Patricia's daughter has a gambling problem. Significant debts, the kind that attracts dangerous people when they go unpaid." "How do you know that?" "Patricia asked me for a loan 2 years ago. I gave her $50,000. No questions asked, because that's what you do for people you trust. She paid it back over 18 months. Scarlett turned from the window. If Damian found out about the daughter's debts, he could have offered to make them disappear in exchange for cooperation. Patricia would have seen it as protecting her child. So we approach her, Mason said, offer her immunity in exchange for testimony, frame it as a way to protect her daughter by getting out from under Damian's control. That could work, Janet Morrison said carefully, but it's risky. If Patricia warns Damian, we lose the element of surprise and he'll have time to cover his tracks. Then we don't give her time to warn him. We approach her today, right now, before Damian knows we're making a move. Scarlett looked at her attorneys. Can you draft an immunity agreement in the next 2 hours? Yes, Janet said. But you need to understand, if Patricia refuses or if this goes sideways, you're burning your relationship with your head of legal right before a major corporate battle. You'll be fighting Damian without one of your key advisors. I'm already fighting him without her. She chose sides the minute she started taking his meetings. Scarlett's jaw set. Mason's right. We move fast and we move hard. Patricia either cooperates or she goes down with Damian. The attorneys left to draft documents. Scarlett and Mason remained in the conference room, the silence between them heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Scarlett sat down across from him. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For putting you in danger last night, for using you without fully explaining the risks, for dragging you into a fight that could cost you everything. Mason thought about Chloe's surgery, about the medical license reinstatement papers sitting in his apartment, about 3 years of treading water finally giving way to forward motion, even if that motion was terrifying. You gave me a chance when nobody else would. I knew the risks. Did you? Because I'm not sure I did. Scarlett ran a hand through her hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. I've been so focused on stopping Damian that I forgot other people might get hurt in the process. That's exactly the kind of tunnel vision that let him get this close to destroying me in the first place. You didn't let him do anything. He's a criminal who targeted you because you built something worth stealing. Maybe. Or maybe I was so busy proving I could succeed that I stopped paying attention to who was actually standing beside me. She met his eyes. How's Chloe? The question surprised him. She's okay. Scared. Trying to be brave for me because she thinks I need it. She's probably right. Yeah. Mason smiled despite himself. 7 years old and already smarter than her father. I'd like to meet her when this is over. Scarlett said it casually, but Mason heard the loneliness underneath. If that's appropriate. Why wouldn't it be appropriate? Because I'm your employer and there are boundaries, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to... She stopped herself. I don't have family, Mason. My parents died when I was 19, and I spent the next decade building this company instead of building relationships. Everyone in my life works for me or wants something from me. The idea of knowing someone just because they're worth knowing feels foreign. Mason understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. Chloe would love to meet you. She's been asking who I'm working for. I told her you're someone important. I'm someone desperate who got lucky enough to find help when I needed it most. Scarlett's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and stood. The attorneys are ready. Let's go get Patricia to tell us the truth. Mom, it's ski about that. They drove to Patricia Vance's house in Scarlett's personal car, a sleek sedan that handled Boston traffic like it was designed for this specifically. The attorneys followed in a separate vehicle. Patricia lived in a modest colonial in Brookline, the kind of house that said comfortable but not extravagant. Her car was in the driveway. Scarlett knocked. It took almost a minute before Patricia opened the door, still in pajamas with coffee in hand. When she saw Scarlett standing there, all the color drained from her face. We need to talk, Scarlett said. Can we come in? Patricia looked past Scarlett to Mason, then to the attorneys climbing out of their car behind them. For a second, Mason thought she might slam the door and refuse. Instead, she stepped back and let them inside. The living room was neat but lived in, with family photos on the walls and a stack of legal briefs on the coffee table. Patricia set down her coffee with shaking hands and sat on the edge of her couch like she was expecting an execution. I know why you're here, she said quietly. Then this should be quick. Scarlett remained standing, her posture rigid. How long have you been working with Damian? 8 months, since he first approached me about the takeover. Why? Patricia's hands twisted together in her lap. My daughter Emily has a gambling addiction. Started online, progressed to illegal bookmakers. She racked up debts, significant ones, to people who don't accept payment plans. They were threatening her. Damian found out somehow and offered to clear the debts if I helped him. Helped him how? Shashaktumau. Legal strategy for the takeover. Advice on corporate governance loopholes. Information about your personal finances and holdings. Patricia's voice cracked. And yes, before you ask, bossy, I knew about the safety flaw in the AI platform. Damian asked me to bury the internal memos and delay any legal review until after the FDA approval went through. Scarlett's expression didn't change, but Mason saw her fists clench at her sides. People could die because of that platform. I know, and you helped hide it anyway. I helped hide it because the alternative was watching my daughter get hurt, or worse, by people I couldn't protect her from. You want to judge me for that? Go ahead. I've been judging myself for months. This isn't about judgment, Janet Morrison said, stepping forward. It's about consequences. You're facing criminal conspiracy charges, disbarment, and federal prison time. But we can offer you immunity in exchange for testimony against Damian and any board members who knowingly participated in the fraud. Patricia looked up sharply. Immunity. Full immunity from prosecution. Your testimony gets Damian and his allies removed, and you walk away with your license and freedom intact. We'll even help arrange legitimate debt relief for your daughter through proper channels. What's the catch? You testify at an emergency board meeting tomorrow. On record. Detail everything Damian asked you to do, everyone who knew about the safety flaw, and every dollar that changed hands to buy cooperation. Janet pulled out the immunity agreement. And you do it knowing that Damian will spend decades in prison, partially because of your testimony. Patricia read the agreement slowly, her hands still trembling. Mason watched her face cycle through emotions: relief, fear, guilt, resignation. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks. He told me nobody would get hurt, she whispered. Damian said the safety issue was minor, that it would get patched before anyone even noticed. He said I was protecting my daughter by helping him, that Scarlett would be fine because she'd walk away with a huge payout. He made it sound reasonable. It wasn't reasonable, Scarlett said. It was criminal, but I understand why you believed him. He's very good at making people think they're doing the right thing when they're actually destroying lives. I'm so sorry for all of it. Patricia wiped her eyes. What happens to Emily? To her debts? We'll handle it, Scarlett said. But Patricia, after this is over, I don't want to see you again. You're not fired and you're not going to prison, but our relationship is finished. Clear? Patricia nodded, fresh tears falling. Clear. They spent the next 3 hours going through Patricia's testimony, documenting every meeting with Damian, every board member who knew about the scheme, every piece of evidence that proved conscious wrongdoing rather than ignorance. By the time they finished, they had enough to destroy Damian's credibility and legal standing completely. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock the following afternoon. That gave them less than 24 hours to prepare and coordinate. Mason drove Scarlett back to her office while the attorneys headed off to finalize documentation and legal strategy. You should go home, Scarlett said when they arrived. Be with Chloe tonight. Tomorrow is going to be brutal. What are you going to do? Prepare. Call board members. Make sure everyone understands what's happening and what's at stake. She paused with her hand on the door. Mason, thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I need you to understand. I couldn't have done this without you. You would have found another way. Maybe, but it wouldn't have been better. She got out of the car, then leaned back in. The surgery. Dr. Chen called this morning. She scheduled Chloe for next Tuesday. The clinic trial accepted her application. Mason's breath caught. What? I pulled some strings, used every favor I had accumulated. Your daughter is getting her hearing back, regardless of what happens tomorrow. Scarlett smiled. And for the first time since Mason met her, it reached her eyes. Some promises are worth keeping no matter the cost. Diki gitishiki ikapa. She was gone before Mason could respond, disappearing into the building and leaving him sitting in the car with tears streaming down his face. He'd been fighting for so long, scrambling for any foothold that might lead to saving his daughter, that the idea of actually succeeding felt impossible to process. Chloe was getting her surgery. In 6 days, she'd have a chance at restored hearing. All the collection notices and eviction threats and sleepless nights suddenly felt manageable because the one thing that mattered most was finally within reach. Mason picked up Chloe from school and took her out for ice cream, splurging on money he didn't really have because some moments demanded celebration even when you couldn't afford them. She ordered chocolate with rainbow sprinkles and told him about her day with the unselfconscious enthusiasm of a child who didn't know her father had just committed multiple crimes to secure her medical care. "Daddy, you're smiling," Chloe said, studying his face. "You haven't smiled like that in forever." I have good news, sweetheart. Really good news." "What?" "You're getting your surgery next Tuesday. The doctor who can fix your hearing has an opening and she's going to help you." Chloe's spoon clattered into her ice cream bowl. "Really? You're not joking?" "I'm not joking, I promise." She launched herself across the table to hug him, knocking over his coffee and getting ice cream on his shirt and not caring about any of it. "I can't believe it. I can hear the ocean. We can go to the beach and I'll actually hear the waves." "We'll go to the beach," Mason promised. "As soon as you're recovered, we'll spend a whole day there." They went home and Chloe immediately called Mrs. Chen to share the news. Mason listened to her excited chatter, feeling like maybe, finally, something was going right. He tucked her into bed early. She was too wound up to sleep, but he needed her to at least try, and then sat at his kitchen table trying not to think about tomorrow. The board meeting would either save Scarlett's company or destroy everything they'd worked for. Damian wouldn't go down quietly. He had connections, resources, and a willingness to hurt anyone who got in his way. The fact that he'd threatened Chloe the night before wasn't lost on Mason. If tomorrow went wrong, Damian would make them both pay. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Walk away while you still can. Last chance." Mason stared at the message. It had to be from Damian or someone working for him. A final warning before the battle tomorrow. He should feel scared, should feel the rational human instinct to protect himself and his daughter by backing down from a fight he might not win. Instead, he felt angry. Angry at Damian for thinking threats would work. Angry at a system that let people like him operate without consequences. Angry at 3 years of powerlessness and compromise and watching his daughter suffer because he couldn't afford to help her. Mason deleted the text and sent one of his own to Scarlett. "Damian just threatened me. Tomorrow he's going to fight dirty." Her response came immediately. "Good. So will we." Mason smiled despite himself. He'd spent 3 years surviving, taking punches, accepting that the world was fundamentally unfair, and his job was to endure it. But maybe Scarlett was right. Maybe losing a license didn't change what you were. Maybe buried underneath the bartender uniform and the exhaustion doctor, Mason Reed still existed, and maybe that person was tired of getting pushed around. He checked on Chloe one more time. She'd finally fallen asleep, one arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed bear, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. Mason kissed her forehead gently. "Everything's going to be okay," he whispered. "I promise." For the first time in years, he actually believed it. The next morning arrived too fast. Mason dropped Chloe at school with instructions to stay with Mrs. Chen until he picked her up, no matter how late. She hugged him tightly and made him promise to be safe, which suggested his 7-year-old had figured out more about the situation than he'd intended to share. The board meeting was in Vale Industries' main conference room, the one with panoramic windows and a table that could seat 20. Mason arrived early and found Scarlett already there with her attorneys, reviewing documents and preparing final strategy. She looked exhausted but determined, dressed in a sharp suit that projected confidence even if her eyes betrayed the stress underneath. "Ready?" she asked when she saw him. "No, but I don't think that matters." "It doesn't. We're doing this regardless." She handed him a folder. "Sit in the back. If anyone asks, you're here as my personal assistant. Watch Damian. Watch the board members. If anyone tries to leave early or makes suspicious phone calls, flag me." Board members began arriving at 2:45, each one greeting Scarlett with varying degrees of warmth that probably indicated which side they were on. Robert Chen, Marcus Webb, and Diana Frost arrived together and made a point of sitting near Damian when he entered at 2:55. The CFO looked calm and collected, like this was just another routine meeting instead of the battle that would determine his future. When he saw Mason in the back of the room, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, then calculation. He'd expected Mason to run after the threat last night. The fact that he hadn't meant Damian needed to recalculate his approach. At exactly 3 o'clock, Scarlett called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have urgent business to address regarding corporate fraud, safety violations, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. She pressed a button and a projection screen lit up with financial data. For the past 8 months, CFO Damian Graves has been systematically embezzling company funds, bribing board members, and preparing to execute a hostile takeover of Vale Industries. The room exploded. Board members started talking over each other, demanding proof and explanation. Damian stood up, his expression one of hurt disbelief. "This is outrageous," he said. "Scarlett, I understand you're under stress, but these accusations are documented with evidence provided by your own computer files and corroborated by testimony from Patricia Vance." Scarlett didn't raise her voice, but everyone went quiet anyway. "Patricia, would you like to explain your role in this conspiracy?" Patricia stood from where she'd been sitting against the wall. She looked terrified but determined. "For the past 8 months, I've been providing Damian Graves with confidential legal information about Vale Industries in exchange for debt relief for my daughter. This included helping him suppress safety data on the AI diagnostic platform currently awaiting FDA approval." The room went silent. Mason watched Damian's face cycle through emotions before settling on cold fury. "This is a setup," Damian said. "Patricia's lying because Scarlett threatened her. None of this would hold up in any legitimate investigation." "Then let's investigate," Scarlett said. She nodded to Janet Morrison, who stepped forward with a thick binder. This binder contains email correspondence between Mr. Graves and board members Robert Chen, Marcus Webb, and Diana Frost regarding financial incentives for supporting a vote of no confidence against Ms. Vale. It also contains internal memos documenting known safety flaws in the AI platform and deliberate suppression of that data to maintain FDA approval timeline. Finally, it contains financial records showing over $2 million in company funds redirected to offshore accounts controlled by Mr. Graves. She set the binder on the conference table. "Everything here is documented with timestamps, digital signatures, and corroboration from multiple sources. Mr. Graves has been systematically defrauding this company while preparing to sell its most valuable asset to outside investors for personal profit." Board members who weren't implicated started flipping through the binder. Mason watched their expressions shift from skepticism to shock to anger. Robert Chen looked like he might be sick. Marcus Webb was already on his phone, probably calling his own attorney. Damian remained standing, but his composure was cracking. "You have no legal authority to—" "Oh, I have every legal authority as CEO of this company to investigate and expose fraud." Scarlett's voice cut through his objection like a blade. "And as of 20 minutes ago, the SEC and FBI have been provided copies of all evidence. Federal investigators are already reviewing the case." That was the kill shot. Damian's face went white. Around the table, board members started putting distance between themselves and him, literally scooting their chairs away like his criminal exposure might be contagious. "You're destroying this company," Damian said, and now his voice shook with barely controlled rage. "That platform is worth billions. If you tank the FDA approval by going public with minor safety concerns, they're not minor." Scarlett slammed her hand on the table. 2% misdiagnosis rate means thousands of people getting wrong treatment recommendations. That's not a bug. That's manslaughter. And you knew it. You knew people would die and you didn't care because profit mattered more than lives. Business requires calculated risks. Murder isn't a business risk. It's a crime. Scarlett looked around the table at the board members. "I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Damian Graves as CFO and ban him from any future involvement with Vale Industries. All in favor?" Hands went up around the table. Even Robert Chen, Marcus Webb, and Diana Frost raised their hands, probably realizing that voting against removal would implicate them further in the conspiracy. "Motion passes unanimously," Scarlett said. "Damian, you're fired. Security will escort you from the building." 2 security guards entered the conference room like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Damian looked at them, then back at Scarlett, and Mason saw murder in his eyes. "This isn't over." "But," Damian said quietly, "you think you've won, but I have connections you can't imagine. Resources. People who owe me favors. And they're all being investigated too," Scarlett said. "Fraud this extensive doesn't happen in isolation. Everyone you worked with, everyone you paid off, everyone who knew what you were doing, they're all going down with you. Damian turned toward the door, then paused. His eyes found Mason in the back of the room. You have a daughter, Chloe, right? 7 years old? Mason's blood went cold. He stood up slowly, every protective instinct screaming. Don't, Scarlett warned. Damian, if you threaten him or his child, I'm not threatening anyone. Damian's smile was poison. I'm just observing that people who make enemies in powerful places often find their lives become complicated. Medical procedures get delayed. Schools lose enrollment records. Accidents happen. Mason crossed the room before his brain could tell his body not to. He grabbed Damian by his expensive suit jacket and shoved him against the wall hard enough to rattle the glass partition. You stay away from my daughter, Mason said, his voice low and dangerous in a way he'd never heard before. Whatever you do to me, whatever connections you leverage, whatever revenge you want to take, you leave Chloe out of it, or I swear to God I will spend the rest of my life making sure you regret it. Security moved to intervene, but Scarlett held up a hand, stopping them. Damian smiled down at Mason, even with his back against the wall. There it is. The real Dr. Reed, not the scared bartender. Damian's voice was almost conversational. You think you're protecting her, but you're just painting a target on her back. Everyone you've helped take down today has resources. Some of them aren't as ethical as I am. Joan. Mason released him and stepped back, fists still clenched. Security immediately grabbed Damian and started marching him toward the door. But his last words echoed in the conference room long after he'd been removed. As ethical as I am. Like threatening a 7-year-old was somehow restrained behavior, Scarlett moved to Mason's side. He's trying to scare you. He can't actually— Yes, he can, Mason interrupted. He just got fired and exposed for fraud. He has nothing to lose, and I gave him the perfect target for revenge. His hands were shaking. I need to get Chloe. Right now. Mason. Right now, Scarlett. She must have seen something in his face that killed any argument because she just nodded. Take the car. I'll have security follow you. And Mason? He's not going to get near her. I promise you that. Mason was already moving toward the door. He didn't wait for the elevator, just took the stairs 3 at a time, 62 floors down until his legs burned and his lungs screamed. He burst into the lobby and ran for the car, not caring who saw him or what they thought. The drive to Chloe's school took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Mason kept checking his mirrors, looking for anyone following, anyone who might be connected to Damian. The rational part of his brain knew this was paranoia, that Damian couldn't mobilize that fast, that threatening a child was something people said when they were desperate, not something they actually did. But the irrational part, the father part, only knew that his daughter was vulnerable, and someone had just put her in their crosshairs. He pulled up to the school at 3:45, 15 minutes before dismissal. The security guard at the entrance recognized him from drop-offs and let him through. Mason went straight to Chloe's classroom, where her teacher looked surprised to see him early. Is everything okay, Mr. Reed? Family emergency. I need to take Chloe home. Iket. Chloe looked up from her math worksheet, concerned. Daddy? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. We just need to go. They were back in the car within 5 minutes. They were back. Mason locked the doors and headed toward their apartment, still checking mirrors, still looking for threats that might not exist but that he couldn't afford to ignore. Chloe sat quietly in the passenger seat, reading his mood with that unnerving perceptiveness she'd developed over the past few years. Someone scared you, she said finally. No, honey, I'm just being careful. Daddy, I can tell when you're lying. She turned to look at him. Did something bad happen? Mason thought about lying again, about maintaining the fiction that everything was fine and she didn't need to worry. But Chloe deserved better than that. She'd been living with uncertainty and fear for months. She could handle the truth. Someone made a threat, he said carefully. They're angry because I helped stop them from doing something wrong. But they can't actually hurt us. It was just words meant to scare me. Are the police going to help? The police and the FBI are already involved. The person who made the threat is going to prison for a long time. Chloe processed this information. Is this about my surgery? About getting the money to pay for it? Mason's heart cracked. Part of it, yeah. Then I'm glad you did it. even if someone got mad. She reached over and squeezed his hand. You're a good daddy, the best daddy. And I'm not scared because you're here. Mason had to pull over because he couldn't see through the tears anymore. He parked on a side street and pulled Chloe into a hug, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. I love you so much, he whispered, more than anything in the world. Hey, I love you too, Daddy. She hugged him back just as tightly. Everything's going to be okay. You promised, remember? I remember. They sat there for a long moment, father and daughter holding each other in a car on a random Boston street while the afternoon faded around them. Eventually, Mason's phone buzzed, a text from Scarlett. Damian's been arrested. FBI took him into custody 20 minutes ago. He won't make bail. You and Chloe are safe. Mason showed the message to Chloe. She read it carefully, then smiled. See? Everything's okay. Yeah, Mason said, wiping his eyes. Everything's okay. They went home and made dinner together, pasta with sauce from a jar because neither of them had energy for anything complicated. Mason helped Chloe with homework while keeping one eye on the door, still not entirely convinced that the threat was truly over. His phone buzzed periodically with updates from Scarlett and her legal team. Damian was in federal custody. The board had voted to implement immediate safety reviews on the AI platform. Patricia Vance was cooperating fully with investigators. At 8 o'clock, someone knocked on the apartment door. Mason tensed, moved Chloe behind him, and checked the peephole. Scarlett stood in the hallway holding shopping bags. He opened the door. What are you doing here? I brought dinner. She held up the bags. Real dinner, not whatever you probably made from cans. Can I come in? Mason stepped aside. Scarlett entered and immediately focused on Chloe, who was peeking out from behind her father with curiosity. You must be Chloe, Scarlett said, setting the bags on the counter. I'm Scarlett. I work with your dad. You're the important person he's been helping. I'm the person who's been getting help from your dad when I really needed it. Scarlett knelt down to Chloe's level. He talks about you all the time. Says you're brave and smart and the best listener he knows. Chloe smiled shyly. He says nice things about you too. He said you're helping me get my surgery. That's true. But really, your dad helped himself get your surgery. I just had some phone numbers he needed. They ate dinner together at Mason's small kitchen table. Thai food that was definitely too expensive for the neighborhood, but that tasted better than anything Mason had cooked in months. Scarlett asked Chloe about school and her favorite subjects, and what she wanted to be when she grew up. Chloe talked about marine biology and the ocean, and how she wanted to study whales once she could hear them properly. Mason watched them interact and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't his employer doing damage control or checking on an asset. This was a lonely woman who'd built walls for protection, discovering that sometimes walls kept out the people worth knowing. And it was his daughter, who'd learned too young that adults couldn't always be trusted, deciding that maybe this particular adult was different. After dinner, Chloe yawned dramatically. Mason took her to brush her teeth and get ready for bed. When he came back to the kitchen, Scarlett was washing dishes. You don't have to do that, Mason said. I know, I want to. She rinsed a plate carefully. Today went better than I expected. Damian's done. The board is terrified of further exposure, so they're cooperating completely. The AI platform is being pulled for safety review, which will delay our market entry, but save lives. Patricia's testimony is airtight. We actually won. Then why don't you sound happy about it? Scarlett set down the dish and turned to face him. Because winning this fight cost me things I didn't realize I'd been taking for granted. Patricia's betrayal hurt more than I want to admit. Realizing how many people saw me as an opportunity instead of a person was devastating. And I keep thinking about what Damian said, that I'm so focused on proving myself that I forget to actually connect with anyone. You're connecting right now. I'm learning to. That's different. She dried her hands on a towel. Thank you for letting me come over tonight, for introducing me to Chloe. I know it was probably weird and you didn't have to. I wanted you to meet her, and I think she needed to meet you. To know that the person her dad's been helping is real and cares about what happens to us. Scarlett smiled, and Mason realized it was becoming less rare to see that expression reach her eyes. I do care. More than is probably professional. Good thing I don't work for you anymore then. You absolutely still work for me. We haven't even discussed your actual employment contract yet. Maybe I want different terms. Such as? Mason thought about the past 72 hours, about everything that had changed since that rainy night in McGrath's bar. Such as I want to finish reinstating my medical license. Get back into medicine properly, not just as someone's assistant. Done. I'll have my attorneys fast-track the reinstatement paperwork. What else? I want to make sure Chloe's surgery happens exactly when scheduled with no complications or last-minute changes. Already arranged. Dr. Chen confirmed everything this afternoon. Surgery is Tuesday at 7 a.m. And I want you to stop acting like helping me is somehow inconvenient or inappropriate. You gave me hope when I'd given up on having any. That matters. Don't diminish it. Scarlett looked at him for a long moment. You're much more assertive than you were 3 days ago. 3 days ago I was drowning. Now I'm swimming. There's a difference. I like it. She picked up her bag from where she'd left it by the door. Get some sleep, Mason. You've earned it. I'll check in tomorrow about the surgery logistics. Scarlett? She paused in the doorway. Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For protecting Chloe. For giving me a chance to be something more than a bartender who failed at medicine. You never failed at medicine. You got set up by someone who saw you as disposable. Her expression softened. But you're welcome. And Mason, you're not disposable. Not to me. She left before he could respond. Mason locked the door behind her and stood in his small apartment, feeling like maybe, finally, his life was heading in the right direction. He checked on Chloe one more time. She was fast asleep, clutching her stuffed bear, then collapsed into bed and slept without nightmares for the first time in 3 years. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Mason spent Saturday organizing paperwork for Chloe's surgery, insurance forms that Scarlett's team had somehow fast-tracked, consent documents that Dr. Chen's office sent over, preoperative instructions that seemed simultaneously thorough and terrifying. Chloe helped by coloring in the margins of papers he didn't need anymore, humming tunelessly while Mason tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. Sunday morning, they went to the park. Chloe wanted to feed the ducks at the pond, which meant Mason stood ankle-deep in mud watching his daughter throw breadcrumbs with the kind of unself-conscious joy that reminded him why any of this mattered. An older woman walking past smiled at them. Beautiful daughter you have, she said. Thank you. Cherish these moments. They grow up so fast. Mason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The woman moved on and Chloe ran back to him, her shoes squelching in the mud. Daddy, did you see? That one duck ate 3 pieces at once. He's probably the boss duck. Probably, Mason agreed, pulling her out of the mud before she sank deeper. They walked home slowly, Chloe chattering about boss ducks and whether animals had jobs, and if seagulls were just ocean ducks. Mason listened and responded and tried to memorize everything about this moment. The way afternoon sunlight caught in her hair. The gap-toothed smiles she gave him when he agreed that seagulls were definitely ocean ducks. The weight of her small hand in his. That night, Scarlett texted asking if she could stop by. Mason hesitated before responding yes. Chloe was already in pajamas watching a nature documentary about whales, her face pressed close to the TV screen to compensate for what her ears couldn't catch. When Scarlett arrived, she brought a gift bag that she handed directly to Chloe. What is it? Chloe asked, already reaching inside. Something for your surgery. Open it and see. Chloe pulled out a stuffed orca whale, black and white and exactly the right size for hugging. Her face lit up. He's perfect. Thank you. I thought you might want a friend for the hospital, someone brave to keep you company. Scarlett glanced at Mason. Can I talk to your dad for a minute? Chloe nodded, already absorbed in examining her new whale from every angle. Mason followed Scarlett onto the small balcony off his living room. The evening air was cool, carrying the smell of someone's barbecue and distant traffic sounds. How are you holding up? Scarlett asked. Terrified, hopeful, both at the same time. Mason leaned against the railing. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if the surgery doesn't work? What if there are complications? What if it works exactly the way it's supposed to and Chloe gets her hearing back and you finally catch a break? Scarlett interrupted gently. That's an option too. I'm not used to good outcomes. I noticed, but maybe it's time to start getting used to them. She pulled an envelope from her jacket. This is for you. Don't open it until after the surgery. Mason took the envelope, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. What is it? A reminder that some people keep their promises, and that you deserve good things even when you don't believe you do. Before Mason could respond, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Reed, this is Detective Sarah Callahan with the Boston Police Department. I need to talk to you about Damian Graves. Mason's stomach dropped. What about him? He made bail this morning. We're not sure how his assets should have been frozen, but someone posted $2 million for his release pending trial. You said he wouldn't make bail. We were wrong. I'm calling because he listed you as a potential threat during his release hearing, claimed you assaulted him during the board meeting and have been harassing him. It's complete fabrication, but it means he's building a narrative where you're the aggressor. I wanted you to be aware. Mason looked through the glass door at Chloe playing with her new stuffed whale. He's coming after us. We don't know that, but I'd recommend taking precautions. Stay vigilant. If you see anything suspicious, call immediately. We've assigned extra patrols to your neighborhood and Chloe's school. Extra patrols won't stop someone determined enough, set. Mr. Reed, Damian Graves is under electronic monitoring. He can't leave his property without triggering alerts. He's also prohibited from contacting you, your daughter, or anyone associated with Vail Industries. If he violates those conditions, he goes straight back to jail. Electronic monitoring fails all the time. Detective Callahan was quiet for a moment. You're right to be cautious. Just don't let caution turn into paranoia. We're watching him closely. The call ended. Mason stood on the balcony, gripping his phone hard enough to hurt, feeling the brief moment of hope from earlier evaporating into cold fear. What happened? Scarlett asked. Damian made bail. He's out. That's impossible. His accounts were... She stopped herself, already pulling out her own phone. I'm calling my attorneys. There's no way he should have been able to post that kind of bond. Someone helped him. Someone with resources and motivation to keep him operational. Mason thought about what Damian had said at the board meeting, that he had connections, people who owed him favors. He's going to come after Chloe. I know he is. Then we make sure he can't get near her. I'll hire private security. Round-the-clock protection until what? His trial? That could take months, years. I can't live like that. Chloe can't live like that. Scarlett put her phone away and gripped his shoulders. Mason, listen to me. Damian is desperate and stupid right now. Desperate, stupid people make mistakes. He'll violate his bail conditions, get caught, and end up in a cell where he belongs. But in the meantime, yes, we take precautions. We protect Chloe. We don't let fear paralyze us. You sound very certain for someone whose CFO just got released after threatening a child. I sound certain because the alternative is giving up, and I don't know how to do that. Do you? Mason thought about 3 years of barely surviving, of fighting collection agencies and working double shifts, and watching his daughter's hearing deteriorate while he remained powerless to stop it. No, I don't know how to give up either. Good. Then we move forward. Surgery on Tuesday. Recovery. Getting your medical license reinstated. Building lives that aren't defined by the people who tried to destroy us. She made it sound achievable. Mason wanted to believe her. They went back inside. Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch, the stuffed orca whale clutched in her arms. Scarlett looked at her for a long moment, something soft crossing her face. She's special, Scarlett said quietly. The way she looks at the world, even with everything she's been through. That kind of resilience is rare. She learned it from watching her father fall apart and put himself back together over and over. Maybe. Or maybe she's just inherently stronger than both of us. Scarlett headed for the door, then paused. I meant what I said about hiring security. At least until Damian violates his bail and gets reincarcerated. Please let me do this. Mason wanted to refuse out of pride or independence, or some outdated notion that accepting help made him weak. But pride didn't protect his daughter. Okay, thank you. You don't have to thank me. She matters to me too now. After Scarlett left, Mason carried Chloe to bed. She stirred briefly, mumbled something about boss ducks, and settled back into sleep. He sat on the edge of her bed watching her breathe, thinking about Damian somewhere in Boston, plotting revenge or escape or whatever desperate men plotted when their empires collapsed. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "You took everything from me. Now I take everything from you?" Mason stared at the message, then immediately called Detective Callahan. She answered on the second ring. "Damian just texted me. Threatening message. I'm forwarding it now." "That's a bail violation. We'll have him back in custody within the hour." Her voice was crisp, professional. "Do not respond to the message. Lock your doors. I'm sending a patrol car to your building immediately. What if an hour isn't fast enough? Then you call 911 and you keep your daughter safe until we arrive. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. Stay on the line with me until the patrol car gets there." Mason checked every lock on every door and window while Detective Callahan stayed on the phone, her steady voice providing the only thing keeping him from complete panic. He grabbed a kitchen knife, not because he knew what to do with it, but because having a weapon felt better than having nothing. Then he sat in the hallway between the living room and Chloe's bedroom, where he could see both the front door and his daughter. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Detective Callahan kept talking, filling the silence with updates about patrol car locations and surveillance teams moving into position. Mason's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Finally, red and blue lights flashed through his window. 2 police officers came upstairs and checked his apartment, confirmed there were no signs of forced entry or suspicious activity. One of them was young, maybe 25, with the kind of earnest face that suggested he actually believed police could protect people. "We'll maintain a presence outside your building tonight," the young officer said. "Detective Callahan has also dispatched units to Damian Graves' residence to execute the warrant for his arrest. You and your daughter are safe." But Mason had learned a long time ago that safety was an illusion people told themselves to feel better. Still, he thanked the officers and locked the door behind them. Then he dragged a chair into Chloe's room and sat there for the rest of the night, watching her sleep, listening for sounds that didn't belong, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. Morning arrived without incident. Mason made breakfast while Chloe got dressed, both of them moving through their routine like this was a normal Monday instead of the day before surgery with a criminal somewhere out there who'd made explicit threats. Scarlett called at 7:30. "Damian's in custody. They picked him up at his apartment around midnight trying to cut off his electronic monitor. He violated bail so egregiously that the judge revoked it completely. He's not getting out again." Mason's legs went weak with relief. He sat down hard on a kitchen chair. "You're sure?" "Positive. I just got off the phone with the prosecutor. Damian will stay incarcerated until trial, which has been expedited because of the bail violation. He's done, Mason. He can't hurt you or Chloe." "What about his connections? The people who posted his bail?" "Is being investigated. Turns out the money came from one of the board members, Diana Frost. She's been arrested too. The FBI is unraveling the entire network of people who enabled Damian's fraud. It's going to take weeks to process everyone involved." Mason looked at Chloe eating cereal at the kitchen table, oblivious to the conversation. "So it's really over. The immediate threat is over. The long-term recovery is just starting. But yes, you can breathe now." After the call ended, Mason sat with Chloe while she finished breakfast. She was nervous about tomorrow. He could tell. Kept asking questions about what the surgery would feel like and how long she'd have to stay in the hospital and whether it would hurt. "It might hurt a little," Mason admitted, "but they'll give you medicine so it's not too bad, and I'll be there the whole time. The minute you wake up, I'll be right there. Promise?" "Promise." She seemed satisfied with that. They spent the day doing nothing particularly important, coloring pictures, watching movies, taking a walk around the neighborhood where 2 undercover police officers Scarlett had arranged followed at a discreet distance. Normal activities made extraordinary by the knowledge that tomorrow everything might change. That evening, Mrs. Chen came over with homemade soup. "For good luck," she said, pressing the container into Mason's hands. "And for strength. You're both going to need it tomorrow. Thank you for everything. For watching Chloe all those times I had to work. For never judging me when I couldn't pay you right away. For being there when nobody else was." Mrs. Chen patted his cheek. "You're a good father, Mason, better than you give yourself credit for. That little girl is lucky to have you." After she left, Mason helped Chloe pack a small bag for the hospital, the stuffed orca whale from Scarlet, a coloring book, clean pajamas. She was unusually quiet, her nervousness manifesting as stillness instead of chatter. "Daddy?" she said while he was tucking her in. "What if the surgery doesn't work? What if I'm still deaf after?" Mason had been dreading this question. He sat on the edge of her bed and chose his words carefully. "Then we figure out how to live with it. We learn sign language together. We get you hearing aids. We adapt. But Chloe, you need to know, no matter what happens tomorrow, you're still you. Your hearing doesn't define how special you are." "But I want to hear the ocean. I want to hear music the right way. I want to know what whales sound like." "I know, sweetheart. And Dr. Chen is one of the best surgeons in the world. She's going to do everything she can to give you that." "What if she can't? Then we deal with it together, like we always have." Chloe thought about this, her face serious. "I'm scared." "Me too." "Really? But you're the grown-up. You're not supposed to be scared." Grown-ups get scared all the time. We just get better at hiding it." Mason smoothed hair back from her forehead. "But being scared is okay. It means you care about what happens. And caring is what makes us human." She hugged him tightly. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Chloe Bear. More than you'll ever know." She fell asleep eventually, exhausted by anxiety. Mason stayed in her room until he was sure she wouldn't wake up, then went to the kitchen and opened the envelope Scarlett had given him. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note. "Mason, this is the signing bonus for your official employment contract, which you'll receive after Chloe's surgery. Use it to pay off debts, get ahead on rent, buy your daughter something special. You've earned more than this, but it's a start. And no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what challenges come next, remember, you're not alone anymore. You have someone in your corner who isn't leaving. Scarlett." Mason read the note 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. $50,000. Enough to clear his most pressing debts, enough to stop living in constant fear of eviction and collection agencies, enough to breathe for the first time in years. He thought about the night Scarlett walked into McGrath's bar looking destroyed, about the conversation where they'd both admitted to surviving instead of living, about everything that had happened since then. 2 broken people finding each other in a moment of desperation and somehow building something that resembled hope. His phone buzzed. Another text from Scarlett. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard, but you'll get through it. Both of you will." Mason typed back, "Thank you for everything, for caring about us, for not giving up when you had every reason to." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for reminding me what actually matters. See you tomorrow at the hospital." Mason set an alarm for 5 a.m. and tried to sleep. Anxiety made that nearly impossible. But eventually, exhaustion won, and he drifted off into restless dreams about surgical complications and miraculous recoveries and a future that didn't look quite so bleak. The alarm jolted him awake at 5. He showered quickly, got dressed, then woke Chloe with gentle shaking. She was groggy and confused at first, then remembered what day it was and went very still. "It's time?" she asked. "It's time." They drove to Boston Children's Hospital in darkness, the city still sleeping around them. Chloe clutched her orca whale and stared out the window without speaking. Mason kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, wanting to say something comforting, but not knowing what words could possibly help. The hospital was already busy when they arrived at 6 a.m. Preoperative check-in happened quickly. Nurses who were efficient but kind, paperwork that Mason signed with shaking hands, a private room where Chloe changed into a hospital gown that was comically oversized on her small frame. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at 6:30. She was younger than Mason expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and calloused hands that suggested she spent a lot of time in surgery. She knelt down to Chloe's level. "Hi, Chloe. I'm Dr. Chen. I'm going to be fixing your ears today. Do you have any questions for me?" Chloe held her stuffed whale tighter. "Will it hurt?" "Not while you're asleep. When you wake up, it might feel sore, like when you bump your head. But we'll give you medicine to help with that." "Will I be able to hear better right away?" "Not right away. Your ears will need time to heal first. But in a few weeks, Yes, you should be able to hear much better than you do now. What if something goes wrong? Dr. Chen didn't sugarcoat it. Sometimes surgeries don't work the way we hope, but I've done this procedure hundreds of times and I'm very good at it. I'm going to take excellent care of you, I promise. Chloe looked at her father. Mason nodded. Dr. Chen is the best. She's going to help you. Okay. Chloe took a deep breath. I'm ready, us. The anesthesiologist came in to explain what would happen. The mask, the sleepy feeling, the way she'd wake up in recovery with her father beside her. Chloe listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and generally handled the situation with more maturity than Mason could manage. At 7 o'clock exactly, they wheeled her toward the operating room. Mason walked alongside the gurney holding Chloe's hand until they reached the doors marked Authorized Personnel Only. This was where he had to stop, where he had to let strangers take his daughter into a room he couldn't follow her into and trust that they'd bring her back whole. I love you, sweetheart, he said, squeezing her hand. I'll see you very soon. Oz. Love you too, Daddy. Her voice was small and scared, but brave. Then the doors swung closed, and she was gone. Mason stood in the empty hallway feeling like someone had hollowed him out. A nurse gently guided him toward the surgical waiting area, a room with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines and a coffee machine that looked like it had been making terrible coffee since 1985. Scarlett was already there. Hey, she said, standing when she saw him. How is she? Scared, brave, handling it better than I am. Mason collapsed into a chair. How long does this take? Dr. Chen estimated 3 to 4 hours. Could be longer depending on complications. Don't say complications. Sorry, depending on how complex the nerve repair turns out to be. They sat together in silence for a while. Other families occupied the waiting room, each carrying their own anxiety about whatever surgery their loved one was undergoing. A man in the corner was praying quietly. A woman near the window was crying while her husband held her hand. Mason felt connected to all of them through shared helplessness. I keep thinking about what happens if it doesn't work, Mason said eventually. If we go through all this and Chloe still can't hear him, then you deal with it like you've dealt with everything else. One day at a time. That's not very comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to remind you that you're stronger than you think. You've survived 3 years of hell. You'll survive this too. Mason wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. He'd survived the loss of his medical license, his wife leaving, mounting debt, and his daughter's progressive deafness. He'd survived being set up for fraud, working jobs he hated, and facing down a criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed him. If the surgery failed, he'd survive that too. They both would. Time moved strangely in the waiting room. Sometimes minutes felt like hours. Sometimes entire hours disappeared without Mason noticing. Scarlett brought him coffee that he didn't drink and a sandwich he couldn't eat. She sat beside him without demanding conversation, just providing presence when presence was all he needed. At 10:15, a surgical nurse came into the waiting room looking for him. Mason's heart stopped. It was too early. Something had gone wrong. Mr. Reed, Dr. Chen asked me to update you. The surgery is progressing well. Chloe's doing great. We're about halfway through. Relief flooded him so completely, he almost collapsed. She's okay? She's perfect. Dr. Chen wanted you to know so you wouldn't worry. After the nurse left, Mason put his head in his hands and tried to breathe normally. Scarlett's hand settled on his shoulder, grounding him. See? She's tough. Takes after her father. Cool. At 12:40, Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical area still in her scrubs. Mason was on his feet before she finished pushing through the doors. How is she? The surgery went extremely well. Better than I expected, actually. The nerve damage was significant but repairable. I'm cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. Cautiously optimistic. It means I think she's going to recover most, if not all, of her hearing, but we won't know for certain until the swelling goes down and we can test her properly. That'll be a few weeks. Mason's knees went weak. Scarlett caught his arm, steadying him. Can I see her? She's in recovery now, still waking up from anesthesia. Give her another 30 minutes and then, yes, you can sit with her. Dr. Chen smiled. She did wonderfully, Mr. Reed. You should be very proud. I am. Thank you for everything. Just doing my job. Though I have to say it's nice when Scarlet Veil calls in favors for actually worthwhile causes. She glanced at Scarlet. Most people use their connections for profit. You used yours to save a child's hearing. That matters. After Dr. Chen left, Mason sat back down because standing was suddenly too difficult. Scarlet sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. She's okay, Scarlet said quietly. Your daughter is okay. Yeah, Mason's voice cracked. Yeah, she is. They sat together while families around them received their own updates, their own moments of relief or devastation. The man who'd been praying got good news and wept with gratitude. The crying woman got bad news and left with her husband, their grief palpable. Mason watched it all and felt grateful beyond measure that his story was landing in the good news column for once. At 1:15, a nurse came to get him. Chloe's asking for her daddy. Mason followed the nurse through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, past rooms where other children were recovering from their own surgeries. Chloe was in a private recovery room, propped up in bed with bandages wrapped around her head and an IV in her arm. Her eyes were glassy from medications, but she smiled when she saw him. Daddy, she said, her voice hoarse. I did it. Ah, you did. Mason sat carefully on the edge of her bed and took her hand. How do you feel? Weird, sleepy. My head hurts a little, but not too bad. That's the medicine working, doctor. Chen says the surgery went really well. Does that mean I can hear again? Not yet. Your ears need to heal first, but in a few weeks, yes, you should be able to hear much better. Chloe processed this through her anesthesia fog. Okay, that's good. Her eyes drifted closed. I'm really tired, Daddy. Then sleep, sweetheart. I'll be right here when you wake up. She was asleep before he finished the sentence. Mason sat holding her hand, watching her chest rise and fall, feeling 3 years of accumulated terror finally starting to drain away. His daughter was going to be okay. Not immediately, not without recovery and work and follow-up appointments, but okay. That was more than he had dared hope for 6 months ago. Scarlet appeared in the doorway. Can I come in? Mason nodded. She entered quietly and stood at the foot of Chloe's bed, looking at the sleeping child with an expression Mason couldn't quite read. She's resilient, Scarlet said softly. Going to wake up and keep fighting, just like her father. I'm not sure I've been fighting. Feels more like barely surviving. Same thing, different framing. Scarlet moved closer. Mason, I need to tell you something. About the job offer. About what happens next. This feels like a weird time for that conversation. I know, but I don't want you thinking this. She gestured at Chloe, at the hospital room. Comes with strings. The surgery happened because your daughter needed it, not because I expected anything in return. You don't owe me employment or loyalty or anything else. Mason looked at her. What if I want to work for you? What if I think we make a good team? Then we'll figure it out. But only if it's what you actually want, not what you feel obligated to accept. I want it, not because of the money or the security, but because for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Helping you fight Damian mattered. He gestured at himself. At the hospital room, having someone give me a chance to be more than a bartender with a ruined reputation, that matters too. Bikiachi. Scarlet smiled, genuine and warm. Okay then, partners. In whatever comes next. Partners. They stayed with Chloe through the afternoon. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting medications. Dr. Chen stopped by at 4 to confirm everything looked good and that Chloe could be discharged tomorrow if she continued recovering well. Scarlet eventually left to handle some urgent business calls, promising to return in the evening. Mason sat alone with his sleeping daughter, thinking about how much had changed in less than a week. The broken father who'd been mixing drinks at McGrath's bar was gone, replaced by someone who'd fought back against powerful men, protected his child, and found unexpected connection with a person who understood what it meant to be isolated by circumstances. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mason's heart jumped, Damian was in jail, but paranoia died hard. He opened it cautiously. Mr. Reed, this is Patricia Vance. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted you to know Emily is in treatment now. Real treatment, not just payoff money from Damian. Scarlett helped arrange it. I don't deserve her help, and I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to do the right thing, even when I'd already done so much wrong. Mason stared at the message for a long time. He thought about Patricia's fear that day when they'd confronted her, about the impossible choice between protecting her daughter and maintaining her integrity. He'd judged her harshly for choosing wrong, but maybe judgment was easier when you weren't the one making impossible choices. He typed back, I hope Emily gets better, and I hope you find a way to forgive yourself. Sometimes good people make bad decisions when they're desperate. That doesn't make them bad people. The response came quickly. Thank you. That means more than you know. Chloe stirred in her bed, making small noises that suggested she was waking up. Mason pocketed his phone and focused entirely on his daughter. Her eyes fluttered open, clearer now than they'd been earlier. Hey, sleepyhead, Mason said gently. How are you feeling? Better? Less foggy? She looked around the hospital room. Where's Scarlett? She had to work. She'll be back later. I like her. She's nice. And she doesn't treat me like I'm broken just because my ears don't work right. She likes you too. And you're not broken, Chloe. You never were. I know, but other people don't always get that. She shifted carefully in bed. Daddy, after my ears get better, can we do normal things? Like go to movies and concerts and places where you need to hear stuff? Absolutely. Anything you want. I want to go whale watching. I want to hear them singing in the ocean. Then that's what we'll do. The minute Dr. Chen says you're recovered enough, we'll take a boat trip and listen to whales. Chloe smiled, tired but happy. That's going to be so cool. The evening nurse brought dinner, bland hospital food that Chloe picked at without enthusiasm. Scarlett returned at 7 with real food from a restaurant downtown. Chinese takeout that filled the hospital room with smells much better than antiseptic. They ate together, the three of them, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Around 8 o'clock, Chloe's eyes started drooping again. The nurse came in to give her evening medications and suggested Mason should probably get some sleep too. Scarlett offered to stay the night so Mason could go home and rest properly. I'm not leaving her, Mason said. I know. That's why I'm staying too. We'll take shifts. You sleep first. I'll keep watch. Then we'll switch. Mason wanted to argue, but exhaustion was winning. He hadn't slept properly in days and his body was shutting down whether he wanted it to or not. Okay, but wake me if anything changes. I will. I promise. Scarlett made him take the fold-out chair that converted into a narrow cot while she settled into the regular visitor's chair with her laptop. Mason lay down fully clothed and was asleep within minutes. The last thing he saw being Scarlett sitting vigil beside his daughter, like she'd been doing it her entire life. He woke up 6 hours later to find them both asleep. Chloe in her hospital bed, Scarlett curled awkwardly in the chair with her laptop abandoned on the floor. Morning light was just starting to filter through the windows. Mason checked on Chloe first, confirming she was breathing normally and showed no signs of distress. Then he gently shook Scarlett awake. Your turn to sleep properly. She blinked at him, disoriented. What time is it? Almost 6. You've been in that chair all night. Fell asleep by accident. She stretched, wincing at stiff muscles. How's Chloe? Sleeping peacefully. Everything looks good. Scarlett stood and moved to the cot Mason had vacated. She was asleep again within seconds, exhausted by everything the past week had demanded from her. Mason took her place in the chair and opened her laptop, which was still logged into her email. He shouldn't have looked. It was a privacy violation and none of his business. But the top email in her inbox had a subject line that caught his attention. Vale Industries Board Restructuring. Mason opened it. The email was from Richard Walsh, her attorney, detailing the aftermath of Damian's arrest. 3 board members had resigned, including the 3 who'd been taking bribes. Diana Frost was facing criminal charges for posting Damian's bail. The remaining board members had voted unanimously to implement new oversight procedures and ethical guidelines. But the last paragraph made Mason pause. Additionally, several board members have suggested that Ms. Vale consider bringing new leadership into the company to share the burden of rebuilding trust. While no one questions her integrity or vision, there is concern that the stress of recent events may be affecting her judgment. I recommend we discuss this before the next board meeting to determine how you'd like to proceed. Mason read it twice. The board was trying to push Scarlett out despite her being the victim of the entire conspiracy. They'd probably frame it as concern for her well-being, but the intention was clear. Remove the CEO, who'd just exposed massive fraud, because it made everyone uncomfortable. He closed the laptop and looked at Scarlett sleeping on the cot. She'd fought so hard to save her company, had risked everything to stop Damian, and now the people she'd protected were talking about replacing her anyway. Some victories were incomplete, even when you won. Dr. Chen arrived at 7:30 for her morning rounds. She examined Chloe carefully, asked questions about pain levels and nausea, and declared herself satisfied with the recovery progress. She can go home this afternoon if she continues doing this well. I'll send you home with pain medication and care instructions. Follow-up appointment in 1 week. Then we'll schedule hearing tests in 3 weeks to assess the surgery results. 3 weeks, Mason repeated. That's when we'll know if it worked? That's when we'll have data, but based on how the surgery went, I'm optimistic. Dr. Chen smiled at Chloe. You're going to get your hearing back, young lady. I'm very confident about that. Chloe's face lit up with hope that broke Mason's heart and put it back together simultaneously. After Dr. Chen left, Scarlett woke up naturally and immediately checked her phone. Mason watched her read the email from her attorney, watched her face go carefully neutral as she processed the implications. They want me out, she said quietly. I know, I accidentally saw the email. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. It's not exactly surprising. Powerful people don't like being embarrassed, and I embarrassed a lot of them by exposing Damian's network. She set her phone aside. I'll fight it, same as I fought Damian. What if you didn't? Scarlett looked at him sharply. What? What if instead of fighting to keep running a company that doesn't appreciate you, you built something new? Something where you weren't constantly battling board members and office politics? That's not how it works. You don't just walk away from a billion-dollar medical technology company. Why not? If staying means compromising who you are or becoming someone you don't recognize, why not walk away? Mason thought about his own experience losing his medical license and thought about his own. Sometimes losing the thing you built creates space for building something better. Scarlett sat on the edge of Chloe's bed thinking, what would I even build? Whatever you want. Medical technology that actually prioritizes patients over profit. A clinic that provides care regardless of ability to pay. A foundation that funds research into rare conditions like Chloe's. Mason shrugged. Or something completely different. The point is, you'd be free to choose instead of spending your life fighting people who want to use you. That's a nice dream. So was saving Chloe's hearing. Dreams work out sometimes. Chloe, who'd been pretending to sleep through their conversation, opened her eyes. I vote for the clinic that helps kids like me. That would be really cool. They both looked at her. She grinned. How long have you been awake? Mason asked. Long enough to know Scarlett is thinking about quitting her job. Which is kind of scary, but also kind of exciting. Chloe sat up carefully. You should do it. Life's too short to be miserable at work. That's what Mrs. Chen always says. Imboes. Mrs. Chen is very wise, Scarlett said, but starting over is scary. Everything's scary until you do it. That's what Daddy taught me. Chloe looked at her father. Right. Mason smiled. Right. They spent the rest of the morning waiting for discharge paperwork and final medical clearances. Scarlett made phone calls in the hallway, to her attorneys, to board members, to people whose advice she trusted. When she came back, something in her posture had shifted. I'm resigning, she said, effective immediately. I'll walk away with a significant exit package and full rights to several patents I developed before the company went public. Enough to build something new without having to compromise. Are you sure? Mason asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. She looked at Chloe. Because this young lady is right. Life's too short to be miserable, and I've been miserable for years without admitting it. At 2 o'clock, a nurse brought discharge papers in a wheelchair despite Chloe's protest that she could walk fine. Hospital policy dictated wheelchair transport to the exit, so Chloe accepted it with only minor grumbling. Mason pushed her toward the elevator while Scarlett carried the discharge information and medication instructions. They made it as far as the lobby before Chloe started crying. Not from pain, but from overwhelming emotion finally breaking through. "I was so scared," she sobbed. "I didn't want to tell you because you were already scared, but I thought I was going to wake up and still be deaf and disappoint everyone." Mason knelt in front of the wheelchair and pulled her into a hug. "You could never disappoint me. Never. No matter what happened with the surgery. But you wanted it to work so badly. I wanted you to be happy and healthy. The hearing was just one way to get there. If it hadn't worked, we would have found another way." Chloe cried harder, releasing 3 years of accumulated fear and pressure. Mason held her while people in the hospital lobby politely pretended not to notice, giving them space for their moment. When she finally calmed down, Scarlett handed her tissues and knelt beside Mason. "You know what I think?" Scarlett said gently. "I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. 7 years old, and you face surgery without falling apart. That takes real courage. I fell apart just now." "That's not falling apart. That's being human. There's a difference." Scarlett smiled. "And humans are allowed to cry when they're overwhelmed." They made it to the car without further emotional breakdowns. Chloe fell asleep in the back seat before they'd gone 3 blocks, exhausted by everything. Mason drove carefully while Scarlett made more phone calls, her resignation already causing ripples through Boston's business community. When they arrived at Mason's apartment building, Scarlett helped carry Chloe upstairs. They got her settled in bed with her stuffed orca whale and pain medication within reach. She woke up long enough to mumble thanks, then was asleep again immediately. Mason walked Scarlett back to her car. They stood in the parking lot while afternoon sun cast long shadows between buildings. "What happens now?" Mason asked. "Now we figure out what comes next. For both of us." Scarlett leaned against her car. "I meant what I said about building something new. A clinic, a foundation. Something that actually helps people instead of just generating profit. I want you involved in that. Not as an employee, but as a partner. I'm not reinstated yet. Can't practice medicine until... Then we'll wait until you are. Or we'll structure it so you're doing other things until your license comes through. The point is, I want to build this with someone who actually cares about patients over spreadsheets." Mason thought about going back to medicine, about using his training to help people again instead of mixing drinks at a bar. "Okay, let's do it. Just like that? Just like that. I spent 3 years being afraid to take risks. I'm done with that." Scarlett smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd found something she'd been looking for without knowing it was missing. "Okay then, partners." Partners. She got in her car, rolled down the window. "Get some rest, Mason, both of you. I'll call tomorrow to check on Chloe." "Bossy." Yeah. Mason watched her drive away, then went back upstairs to his daughter. She was still sleeping, her face peaceful despite the bandages around her head. He sat in the chair beside her bed and thought about everything that had happened since that rainy night when a broken billionaire walked into a bar looking for somewhere to exist as a person instead of a resource. 2 broken people finding each other at exactly the right moment, or maybe the wrong moment, depending on how you looked at it. Either way, they'd found each other. And somehow, against all odds and logic and reason, they were building something that looked like hope. Mason's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He opened it cautiously, half expecting another threat. "Mr. Reed, this is Detective Callahan. Just wanted to update you. Damian Graves attempted to contact you again from jail using a contraband phone. He's been moved to solitary confinement and the device was confiscated. You won't be hearing from him again. Take care of that daughter of yours." Mason deleted the message and put his phone away. Damian was done. The board members who'd enabled him were done. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed Scarlett's company was done. All that remained was recovery and rebuilding and learning to live without looking over their shoulders for the next disaster. Chloe stirred in her sleep, mumbled something about whales, and settled back into stillness. Mason sat beside her and allowed himself, for the first time in 3 years, to believe that maybe everything was actually going to be okay. Not perfect, not without challenges or setbacks or hard days ahead, but okay. And sometimes okay was more than enough. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Chloe recovered faster than expected, her resilience once again proving stronger than medical predictions. The bandages came off after 10 days, revealing small scars behind her ears that would fade with time, but that she wore with odd pride, telling anyone who'd listen about her surgery with the unself-conscious detail of a 7-year-old who'd survived something important. Mason returned to a version of routine, making breakfast, walking Chloe to school, spending afternoons working with Scarlett on plans for the new medical foundation they were building together. The bartending job at McGrath's became a memory he thought about less and less, replaced by something that felt closer to purpose than survival. But the real test came on the morning of Chloe's hearing evaluation, 3 weeks and 2 days after surgery. Mason woke up before his alarm, anxiety already twisting his stomach into knots. Everything they'd fought for, every risk they'd taken, every sacrifice made, it all came down to whatever Dr. Chen's tests revealed today. Chloe was already awake when he checked her room, sitting cross-legged on her bed with the stuffed orca whale in her lap. "I can't sleep," she said. "Too nervous." "Me too." Mason sat beside her. "But whatever happens today, I know, Daddy, no matter what happens, we deal with it together. You've told me like 100 times. She leaned against him. "But I really want to hear properly again. I miss music, and I want to hear you sing, even though you're terrible at it." "I'm not that terrible. You are, but I love it anyway." They got ready in quiet anticipation, both of them moving through the morning routine with extra care, like going too fast might somehow jinx the outcome. Scarlett had offered to come to the appointment, but Mason declined. This felt like something he and Chloe needed to do alone, just the two of them facing whatever came next. The drive to Boston Children's Hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Mason's life. Chloe pressed her face against the window, watching the city pass by, occasionally humming tunelessly in a way that suggested she was trying to distract herself from worry. Dr. Chen met them in the audiology suite, her expression professionally neutral. In that way, doctors learned to mask optimism until results confirmed it. She led Chloe into a soundproof booth, while Mason watched through the glass, his hands clenched so tight, his knuckles went white. The test seemed to take forever. Dr. Chen played sounds at different frequencies and volumes, asking Chloe to indicate when she heard them. From where Mason stood, he couldn't tell if his daughter was responding quickly or slowly, if her reactions suggested success or failure. All he could do was watch and wait, and try not to let hope become expectation that could then become devastation. Finally, Dr. Chen removed Chloe's headphones and said something that made Chloe's face split into the biggest smile Mason had seen in years. His heart started racing. "Doctor." Chen opened the booth door, and Chloe ran straight to her father. "I can hear, Daddy. Really hear. Dr. Chen played sounds, and I heard all of them." Mason looked at Dr. Chen over Chloe's head, needing adult confirmation. The doctor smiled. "The surgery was a complete success. Chloe's hearing has been restored to approximately 95% of normal levels. The remaining 5% may improve with time as the nerves finish healing, or it may represent permanent but minimal loss. Either way, she should have no significant difficulty in daily life." The words didn't feel real. Mason had spent so long preparing for disappointment that success felt like a foreign language he didn't quite understand. 95%. 95%, which for someone who is facing complete deafness is essentially a miracle. Dr. Chen knelt down to Chloe's level. "You did everything right during recovery. I'm very proud of you." "Can I go whale watching now?" Chloe asked immediately. "Give it another 2 weeks to make sure everything's fully healed. Then, yes, you can do whatever you want." They left the hospital in a daze of relief and joy. Chloe talked nonstop the entire drive home, testing her restored hearing by asking Mason to say things at different volumes and from different angles in the car. Every sound seemed to delight her. Traffic noise, other people's conversations bleeding through open windows, the particular grinding sound the Honda's transmission made when shifting gears. "Everything's so loud," she said wonderingly. "I forgot how loud the world is." "You'll get used to it again." "I don't want to get used to it. I want to notice it forever." She turned to look at him. "Can we call Scarlett? I want to tell her." Mason pulled over and let Chloe make the call. Scarlett answered immediately, and Chloe launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the test results that was probably incomprehensible, but that conveyed the essential information. The surgery worked, she could hear. Everything was going to be okay. When Chloe finally handed the phone back, Scarlett's voice was thick with emotion. Mason? Yeah. You did it. You saved her. We did it. You made it possible. Semantics. The point is she's okay. A pause. I'm crying in my car like an idiot right now, just so you know. Mason smiled despite his own tears threatening. I think that's allowed. I'm coming over tonight. We're celebrating properly. No arguments. She hung up before he could respond. Mason drove home with Chloe still chattering beside him, and for the first time in 3 years, the collection notices on his kitchen table and the overdue bills and the general chaos of his life felt manageable instead of overwhelming. His daughter could hear. That single fact rearranged everything else into proper perspective. Mrs. Chen came over as soon as she heard the news, bringing homemade cookies and tears and a bone-crushing hug that conveyed years of shared worry finally releasing. I knew it would work, she said, which was definitely a lie, but a kind one. That girl is tough as nails, takes after her father. She's tougher than me. Maybe, but you gave her the foundation to be tough. That counts for something. Scarlett arrived at 6 with enough takeout food to feed a small army and a gift bag she handed directly to Chloe. Inside was a waterproof MP3 player loaded with whale songs and ocean sounds. For when you go whale watching, Scarlett explained. So you can compare what you hear in person to the recordings. Peace. Chloe immediately put in the earbuds and closed her eyes, listening with such intense concentration that both adults went quiet. After a full minute, she opened her eyes, and they were wet with tears. It's beautiful, she whispered. I didn't know whales sounded like this. Wait until you hear them in person, Scarlett said. It's even better. They ate dinner together, the three of them, celebrating with Chinese food and laughter and the kind of easy conversation that comes when people have been through something difficult and survived it together. Chloe talked about going back to school and being able to hear her teachers properly and not having to sit in the front row anymore. Mason talked about his medical license reinstatement paperwork, which was finally moving through the bureaucracy after Scarlett's attorneys applied appropriate pressure. Scarlett talked about the foundation they were building, tentatively named the Vale Reed Foundation for Pediatric Medical Access, which would provide funding and resources for families like Mason's who couldn't afford necessary treatment. Why is it Vale Reed? Chloe asked. Why not just Vale? Because your father is a partner in this, not an employee. His name belongs on it as much as mine. That's cool. Daddy's name on a foundation. Very fancy. Chloe grinned. Can I be on the board when I grow up? Absolutely, Scarlett said. We'll need someone who actually understands what patients go through. You'd be perfect. Awesome. After dinner, Chloe fell asleep on the couch, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the day. Mason carried her to bed while Scarlett cleaned up the kitchen. When he came back, she was standing at his window looking out at the parking lot of his apartment complex with its broken streetlights and cars that had seen better days. I'm buying a house, she said without turning around. Something with space and a yard, room for a family. Mason joined her in the window. You planning on starting a family? I'm planning on having space for the family I'm building, even if it doesn't look traditional. She finally looked at him. You and Chloe, you've become important to me. More than professional partners or friends, you're the people I think about when I'm making decisions about my life. Scarlett, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that somewhere between that first night in the bar and now, you both became essential to my life. And I'm tired of pretending that's just about business or gratitude or any other explanation that lets me pretend I'm not emotionally invested. Mason didn't know what to say to that. 3 months ago, he'd been a broke bartender with no prospects and a dying daughter. Now he was standing in his apartment with a billionaire who'd just admitted she cared about him and Chloe in ways that went beyond their arrangement. It felt surreal and terrifying and exactly right all at once. We're emotionally invested too, he said finally. Chloe asks about you constantly. Wants to know when you're coming over, what you're doing, if you'll be at her next doctor's appointment. And He paused, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. I stopped feeling alone. That's what you gave me. For 3 years, I felt completely isolated. Like I was the only person fighting for Chloe while the world tried to crush us both. You changed that. Scarlett turned to face him fully. So what do we do about it? I don't know. I've never done this before. The whole falling for someone while they help save my daughter's life thing. There's probably not a guidebook. Probably not. She smiled. But maybe we figure it out as we go. Build something real instead of just professional. I'd like that. Chloe would too. Good. Because I already put an offer on a house with a bedroom that would be perfect for a 7-year-old girl who likes whales. Just in case you two ever wanted to stop living in this apartment with the broken elevator and the neighbors who fight at 2 a.m. Mason stared at her. You're asking us to move in with you. Eventually, if you want, no pressure, but yes, I'm asking you to consider building an actual life together, instead of just a working relationship that we pretend isn't something more. She looked nervous now, vulnerable in a way he'd rarely seen. I know it's fast and probably crazy, and definitely not how normal people do things, but we're not exactly normal people. No, Mason agreed. We're really not. So, what do you think? Well, Mason thought about Chloe sleeping in the next room, about the stuffed orca whale Scarlett had given her, about the way his daughter's face lit up whenever Scarlett came over. He thought about 3 months of fighting together, of building trust through crisis, of discovering that sometimes the people who save you are the ones who needed saving too. I think we should talk to Chloe about it. Make sure she's comfortable with the idea before we make any big decisions. Agreed, she gets a vote in this. And I think... Mason paused, making sure he meant what he was about to say. I think I'd like to try. Building something real with you. Seeing if what we have in crisis situations translates to actual normal life. Scarlett's smile was genuine and warm and slightly disbelieving, like she'd expected rejection. Yeah? Yeah, ich. She kissed him then, soft and careful, a question instead of a statement. Mason kissed back, and for a moment everything else fell away. The apartment, the past, the fear that had defined his life for so long. All that existed was this moment, this connection, this tentative hope that maybe broken people could actually build something whole together. When they pulled apart, Scarlett laughed quietly. I have no idea what I'm doing. Me neither. We'll figure it out. Together? Together. The next 2 weeks were a study in adjustment and possibility. Mason and Chloe visited the house Scarlett had bought, a renovated colonial in Brookline with a yard and good schools, and a bedroom that Chloe immediately declared perfect. They talked about what it would mean to move in together, how to merge their lives without losing their individual identities, how to build a family from 3 separate people who'd all been isolated in different ways. Chloe adapted with the easy flexibility of childhood, already calling Scarlett's house home and making plans for where her stuffed animals would go. Mason adapted more slowly, his adult brain conjuring all the ways this could go wrong, even as his heart insisted it was exactly right. The medical license reinstatement came through on a Thursday. Mason opened the official letter alone in his apartment, staring at the words that gave him back his identity as a doctor. Dr. Mason Reed, licensed to practice medicine in Massachusetts. Just like that, 3 years of exile ended with bureaucratic efficiency. He called Scarlett immediately. It came through. I'm reinstated. That's incredible. We need to celebrate. I want to work, actually work. Use my training to help people. Then that's what you'll do. The foundation isn't ready for full operations yet, but I can connect you with clinics that need doctors. Get you back in the field while we build our own operation. Mason spent that evening updating his medical credentials and contacting the clinics Scarlett recommended. Within a week, he had 3 job offers, all of them at facilities that served low-income populations who couldn't access traditional care. He chose a community health center in Dorchester that reminded him why he'd gone into medicine in the first place, to help people who needed it most. His first day back was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Walking into an exam room wearing scrubs instead of a bartender's uniform, introducing himself as a doctor instead of making excuses for why he wasn't one anymore. It felt like reclaiming a part of himself he'd thought was gone forever. The patients were grateful, and the work was hard, and nothing went perfectly, but that was medicine. Messy and human and occasionally miraculous. By the end of his first shift, Mason was exhausted and satisfied in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Chloe's whale-watching trip happened on a Saturday in October, 6 weeks after her surgery. Mason, Scarlett, and Chloe drove to Provincetown and boarded a research vessel that specialized in humpback whale observations. The ocean was rough, the boat rocked constantly, and Chloe spent the first hour looking slightly green. Then the whales appeared. 3 humpbacks surfaced 50 yards from the boat, their massive bodies breaching in synchronized grace that seemed impossible for creatures that size. The boat's hydrophone picked up their songs, low, haunting calls that resonated through the water and the air, and straight into whatever part of the human soul responds to wild, ancient beauty. Chloe stood at the railing with tears streaming down her face, listening with such intensity that she seemed to forget anyone else existed. Mason and Scarlett stood behind her, watching her experience the moment she'd been waiting for since before the surgery was even scheduled. "I can hear them," Chloe whispered, not taking her eyes off the whales. "Daddy." "I can actually hear them singing." "I know, sweetheart. It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." "What?" One of the whales breached directly in front of the boat, its enormous tail slapping the water with a crack that echoed across the ocean. Chloe laughed with pure joy, the kind of uninhibited happiness that reminded Mason why any of this had been worth fighting for. They stayed on the water for 3 hours, following the whale pod as they fed and played and sang their incomprehensible songs. By the time they returned to shore, Chloe had filled an entire notebook with observations and sketches and notes about everything she'd heard. "I'm going to be a marine biologist," she announced in the car on the way home. "I'm going to study whales and protect them and make sure everyone knows how important they are." "That's a great plan," Scarlett said from the driver's seat. "The foundation can fund your education when the time comes." "Really? Really? One of our goals is supporting kids who want to go into science and medicine. You'd qualify." Chloe was quiet for a moment, processing. "So you helping Daddy save my hearing means I get to help other kids later by studying science?" "Essentially, yes." "That's cool. Like paying it forward, but with whales." Mason smiled. "Exactly, like that." The formal adoption proceedings began in November. Scarlett had been hesitant to bring it up, worried that Mason would think she was overstepping or trying to replace Chloe's absent mother. But Chloe asked first, one night while they were eating dinner in the new house they'd all moved into together. "Scarlett, can you adopt me? Like, officially?" Scarlett nearly dropped her fork. "What?" "I want you to be my mom. My real mom left because she didn't want a kid with broken ears, but you helped fix my ears, and you didn't leave. So can you adopt me and be my actual mom instead of just Daddy's girlfriend?" Mason and Scarlett exchanged glances. They'd been taking things slowly, testing the boundaries of their relationship without putting labels on it that might create pressure. But apparently Chloe had her own ideas about what their family should look like. "I'd be honored," Scarlett said, her voice thick with emotion, "if your father is okay with it." "Daddy?" Chloe looked at Mason expectantly. Mason thought about the past 6 months, about everything that had changed since that rainy night in McGrath's bar, about the family they'd built from crisis and desperation, and the kind of connection that didn't follow normal rules. "Yeah, I'm okay with it." The adoption wasn't instantaneous. There were home studies and background checks and legal procedures that took months to navigate. But in March, 6 months after Chloe's surgery, they stood in a courthouse while a judge made it official. Chloe Reed Vale, daughter of Mason Reed and Scarlett Vale, family legally recognized by the state of Massachusetts. Chloe wore a new dress for the occasion and carried her stuffed orca whale because some things were too important to leave at home. When the judge asked if she understood what adoption meant, she answered with the seriousness of someone 3 times her age. "It means Scarlett is my mom now, like officially. And it means we're a real family even though we didn't start out that way." "That's exactly right," the judge said, smiling. "Congratulations to all of you." Oh. They celebrated at Chloe's favorite restaurant, a seafood place with pictures of whales on the walls and a kids' menu shaped like a lobster. Chloe insisted they take a family photo. The 3 of them crowded into a booth, smiling like they'd won something important. Maybe they had. The Vale Reed Foundation officially launched in May with a gala fundraiser that Mason would have found unbearable if not for Chloe making fun of everyone's fancy clothes, and Scarlett's hand in his, grounding him through the social anxiety of being presented as a co-founder of a major medical charity. They raised $2 million that night, all of it earmarked for families who couldn't afford necessary medical care for their children. The first family they helped was a single mother with a son who needed heart surgery. Mason met with them personally, walking them through the process and the funding and the hope that came with someone actually helping instead of just offering sympathy. The mother cried with relief that mirrored what Mason had felt when Scarlett first offered to help Chloe. "Thank you, Tess," the mother said. "You're saving my son's life." "Someone saved my daughter's life. I'm just passing it forward." That became the Foundation's unofficial motto, passing it forward, taking the help you received and extending it to someone else who needed it, building chains of support that connected desperate parents with resources and hope. By June, the Foundation had helped 12 families. By August, 37. The numbers grew as awareness spread, as media covered their work, as other wealthy donors started contributing because Scarlet Veil had built something that actually prioritized people over profit. Mason worked part-time at the Community Health Center and part-time for the Foundation, splitting his energy between immediate care and systemic change. It was exhausting and fulfilling and nothing like the life he'd imagined when he was mixing drinks at McGrath's and wondering how he'd survive another week. Scarlett threw herself into the Foundation's operations with the same intensity she'd once applied to building her company, except now that intensity was channeled toward helping instead of proving herself. She was happier, Mason noticed, lighter, like she'd finally found work that aligned with her actual values instead of just her ambitions. And Chloe thrived. Her hearing remained stable at 95%. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and talked constantly about her plans to study marine biology and save the whales. She also developed an annoying habit of eavesdropping on adult conversations, which Mason supposed was the price of restored hearing. One evening in September, almost exactly a year after that first rainy night, the three of them sat in their backyard watching the sunset. Chloe was doing homework at the patio table, occasionally asking questions about fractions. Mason and Scarlett sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, both of them tired from long days, but content in ways that felt earned rather than given. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into McGrath's that night?" Scarlett asked quietly. "Sometimes, usually in the middle of the night when I can't sleep." "What do you think would have happened?" Mason considered the question honestly. "I think Chloe would have gone completely deaf while I worked myself into an early grave trying to save her. I think you would have lost your company to Damian and spent years fighting legal battles. I think we'd both be surviving instead of living. Dark. Accurate." Scarlett leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad I walked in. I'm glad you noticed I was broken and didn't try to fix me. Just talked to me like I was human. I'm glad you came back. I'm glad you saw something in me worth investing in. I saw someone who loved his daughter enough to risk everything for her. That's not common. It should be. Maybe, but it's not." Chloe looked up from her homework. "Are you two being sappy again?" "Maybe," Scarlett said. "Is that allowed?" "I guess, but it's kind of gross." Chloe grinned to show she was kidding. "Also, I'm stuck on this fraction problem and need help." Mason got up to help her, but paused to look back at Scarlett sitting on the porch swing in their backyard of the house they shared, in the life they'd built together. She smiled at him, and he saw everything they'd survived reflected back. The desperation, the fights, the late nights and hard decisions and moments when giving up would have been easier than continuing. But they'd continued anyway. Both of them. And somehow that continuation had led here, to this moment, to this family that didn't follow any traditional template but that worked anyway. Later that night, after Chloe was asleep, Mason and Scarlett sat together in the living room with the lights low and the house quiet around them. It was the kind of peaceful moment that used to feel impossible, back when Mason's life was defined by crisis and survival mode. "I've been thinking," Scarlett said, "about Damian. What about him? His trial is next month. They're expecting he'll get 20 years for the fraud charges, possibly more if they can make the conspiracy counts stick. Good. He deserves it." "Why? He does. But I've also been thinking about what drove him to it. The desperation to succeed, the fear of being seen as weak, the willingness to hurt people to avoid losing status." She paused. "I could have become that. If things had gone differently, if I'd let the pressure of building the company turn me into someone who prioritized success over humanity. But you didn't, because I got lucky. Because you reminded me what actually mattered before I lost sight of it completely. She turned to look at him. That's what I want the foundation to be. A reminder that success means helping people, not accumulating power or wealth. That the point of having resources is using them to make other people's lives better. Mason understood what she was saying. They'd both been saved by connection at moments when isolation might have destroyed them. Now they were trying to pass that salvation forward, creating networks of support for people who felt as alone as they once had. We're not going to save everyone, Mason said. Some families will still lose. Some kids will still suffer. We can't fix everything. I know, but we can fix some things. And maybe the families we help will go on to help others. And those people will help more. And eventually we build something bigger than just our individual efforts. Passing it forward. Exactly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both thinking about the year behind them and the work ahead. Building the foundation would take years. Helping families, changing systems, proving that medicine could prioritize patients over profit. All of it would require sustained effort and commitment and the willingness to keep fighting even when progress felt slow. But they'd already proven they could survive impossible situations. Everything else felt manageable by comparison. Mason? Scarlett said eventually. Yeah? Thank you for taking a chance on me that first night, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for building this life with me even though it probably seemed crazy. Thank you for seeing something worth saving in a broke bartender who'd given up on himself. You never gave up. You just needed someone to remind you that you were still worth fighting for. Mason thought about that. About 3 years of survival mode, of working multiple jobs and watching his daughter suffer while he remained powerless. He'd felt like a failure for so long that success felt foreign, like something that happened to other people but not to him, except it had happened. Chloe could hear. His medical license was reinstated. He had meaningful work and a family and a future that looked hopeful instead of terrifying. All of it because one rainy night, a broken billionaire walked into a bar and they'd recognized each other's pain. Sometimes that's all it took. Two people finding each other at exactly the right moment and choosing to fight together instead of suffering alone. The next morning was Saturday. Chloe woke them up early by jumping on their bed and announcing that it was beach day, and they'd promised. They'd go and she'd already packed snacks. And also, could they stop at the aquarium on the way home? Mason groaned. Scarlett laughed. And they all got ready for a day at the beach. The three of them piling into the car with towels and sunscreen, and the kind of easy anticipation that came from knowing they had time together without crisis forcing their interactions. The beach was crowded, but they found a spot near the water. Chloe immediately ran to the surf, letting waves crash over her feet while she shrieked with delight. Mason and Scarlett set up their chairs and watched her play, both of them relaxing in the autumn sun. She's happy, Scarlett observed. Yeah, she is. Are you? Mason thought about the question. Was he happy? After 3 years of barely surviving, happiness felt like a complicated emotion. But watching his daughter play in the ocean, she could now hear, sitting beside the woman he loved, knowing they were building something meaningful together. Yeah, he was happy. Yeah, them, he said. I really am. They stayed at the beach until sunset, building sandcastles and collecting shells and listening to Chloe's running commentary about marine life and whale migration patterns and approximately 17 other topics that 7-year-olds found fascinating. When they finally packed up to leave, Chloe was sunburned and sandy and completely content. This was the best day, she announced in the car. We should do it every week. Every week might be ambitious, Mason said, but we can definitely do it regularly. Good. Because I want lots of best days. I want so many best days that I forget what it was like when we had bad days all the time. That's the goal, sweetheart. Chloe fell asleep on the drive home, exhausted by sun and happiness. Mason carried her inside while Scarlett grabbed their beach gear. They got Chloe into bed without fully waking her, then collapsed in their own room, tired but satisfied. I love our life, Scarlett said, already half asleep. Me too. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. They're what made this possible. Scarlett was quiet for a moment. Do you think we would have found each other if things hadn't been so desperate? If you'd still been a practicing doctor and I hadn't been facing corporate betrayal? Mason thought about it. Probably not. We lived in completely different worlds. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we needed to lose everything to find what actually mattered. Now, that's very philosophical for 10 o'clock at night. I'm very tired. Philosophy is easier than normal conversation when your brain is shutting down. She laughed and curled against him. Good night, Mason. Good night, Scarlett. The months continued turning. Damian was convicted in October and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Diana Frost got 12 years. Patricia Vance received probation and community service in exchange for her testimony, and last Mason heard she was doing legal work for a nonprofit that helped domestic violence victims. Sometimes redemption looked like that, imperfect but genuine, people trying to rebuild after mistakes nearly destroyed them. The foundation continued growing. By the anniversary of its launch, they'd helped over 200 families access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. Mason saw the impact firsthand every time he met with a grateful parent or received a letter from someone whose child had been saved by their intervention. He also saw the limits. There were families they couldn't help, kids who needed treatment they didn't have funding to provide, systemic barriers they couldn't overcome, no matter how hard they tried. It was frustrating and heartbreaking and a reminder that good intentions weren't enough to fix everything wrong with the healthcare system. But it was something. And something was infinitely better than the nothing Mason had been able to offer families when he was bartending and buried in his own crisis. In December, Chloe turned 8. They threw her a party with a whale theme, because of course they did. 15 kids showed up to eat cake and play games and watch Chloe open presents that included approximately 17 different books about marine biology. Mrs. Chen came and cried happy tears while talking about how much Chloe had grown. Mason's former bartending colleagues from McGrath's showed up with a card signed by everyone and a gift certificate to the aquarium. It was normal and chaotic and exactly what a child's birthday party should be. Mason watched Chloe laugh with her friends and blow out candles and make a wish she refused to share. And he felt something that had been tight in his chest for years finally release completely. His daughter was okay. More than okay. She was thriving. And he'd done that, along with Scarlett and Dr. Chen and everyone else who'd helped along the way. They'd taken an impossible situation and made it possible through determination and resources, and the willingness to fight when giving up would have been easier. That night, after the party ended and the guests left and Chloe was in bed surrounded by new stuffed whales, Mason and Scarlett cleaned up wrapping paper and leftover cake. She told me her wish, Scarlett said. I thought wishes were secret. She made an exception, said it was too important not to share. What was it? She wished that we'd stay together forever. The three of us, that nothing would break up our family. Mason's throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her that's my wish too, and that we'd do everything in our power to make it come true. Good. That's the right answer. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, both of them tired but content. This was their life now. Birthday parties and foundation work and ordinary evenings spent picking up wrapping paper. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic, it was just real. And real was what they'd both been missing for so long. On New Year's Eve, they stayed home instead of going to any of the charity galas Scarlett had been invited to. Chloe wanted to stay up until midnight for the first time, and they'd agreed as long as she understood she'd be exhausted the next day. She lasted until 11:45 before falling asleep on the couch, her determination no match for her exhausted body. Mason carried her to bed while Scarlett opened champagne. They toasted the new year together at midnight, standing on their back porch, watching fireworks light up the Boston skyline in the distance. To second chances, Scarlett said, raising her glass. To found families, Mason added. To passing it forward. To survival becoming living. They drank and kissed and held each other while the city celebrated around them. A year ago, Mason had been alone in his old apartment, watching the new year arrive with nothing but dread for what it might bring. Now he was here, in a house he shared with people he loved, doing work that mattered, living a life that felt earned rather than given. Sometimes the universe gave you exactly what you needed at exactly the right moment. Sometimes broken people found each other in bars during rainstorms and built families from shared desperation. Sometimes fighting for one child's hearing led to helping hundreds of families access care they desperately needed. Sometimes everything fell apart so something better could be built from the pieces. Mason didn't believe in fate or destiny or any kind of cosmic plan. He believed in luck and timing and the human capacity to keep fighting even when everything suggested giving up would be easier. He believed that connection mattered, that compassion could change outcomes, that sometimes the best families were the ones you chose rather than the ones you were born into. Most of all, he believed that his daughter could hear the ocean, and that single impossible miracle had been worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of fear and desperation that led to it. The fireworks faded. The new year settled into being just another day that would bring its own challenges and rewards. Mason and Scarlett went inside and checked on Chloe one more time. Still sleeping, surrounded by whales, safe and healthy and loved. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.